Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Luffy Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Luffy Becomes Blind Pirate? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. When Dayton the Bandit called with bad news, Monkey D. Garp added another reason to his list of why he hated pirates. Some stinking small-time pirates who thought they were big shots made his grandson blind. Garp was absolutely livid and could only find comfort in the fact that the pirates were burned alive in Grey Terminal. Though Garp would have preferred to mutilate them with his bare hands. His first thought when he received the news, however, was worry for his stupid grandson. The idiot hid the fact he was losing his sight until it was completely gone. If they had known earlier, they might have been able to save some of his sight. His second thought was about how he could no longer try to pull his grandson into joining the Marines. Well, if Garp was completely honest, he didn't want to force his biological grandson to join the Marines anymore. If Luffy was going to live without the ability to see the wonders of the world, then Garp would make DMN sure that he would at the very least live in happiness. And if that meant letting his grandson be a pirate, then so be it. He could still annoy Ace into becoming a Marine. One was better than none after all. Another part of him would prefer if his grandson didn't do anything and simply stayed on Dawn because it would be safer for his boy, but Garp knew that trouble would find Luffy even if he stayed put. His third thought was to find someone to properly teach Luffy and Ace some stuff about Haki. Observation Haki, specifically. Garp thought long and hard on the matter before deciding that he would only let the very best teach his grandsons. If the very best just so happened to be a pirate, well, Garp worked with criminals before. He was certain that everything would turn out okay. So with that thought in mind, Garp took a few months vacation and left Marineford. He rampaged a bit in the New World and then returned to Dawn Island with his grandson's teacher in tow. Quite frankly, despite his ability of future sight with the use of Haki, Charlotte Katakuri would never be fully prepared for what any member of the D family did. Right now, he was certain that nothing could top the surprise Vice Admiral Monkey D. Garp gave. It was just another day of inspection, and Katakuri was returning to his home. He had received a brief call from his terribly irritated mother, but she had simply told him that she could finally return a favor. That person who held the favor over his mother was currently sitting in his home. His Haki warned him of who the visitor was, but it didn't make him any less surprised. Katakuri was certain that there was nothing in the world that would have prepared him to be greeted by the sight of Garp the Fist sitting in his home, snacking away on rice crackers. With a silent sigh, Katakuri took his own seat and waited for the man to speak. Regardless of what Garp asked, he would have to agree to it because of the life debt the entire Charlotte family owed to the man. Katakuri was aware of how Mama hated to think, much less talk, of that time, but he knew that if Garp had not let his mother go after the fight with the Rocks pirates nearly 3 decades ago, then the Charlotte family wouldn't have survived the attacks of their enemies. A prediction, entered his mind through his observation Haki. He blinked in surprise and couldn't, think of a reply until the man himself actually said it aloud. "You're gonna train my grandsons for at least a year," Garp said. "Now?" "Yup, pack your bags, and we'll get going to East Blue." Katakuri had only met 2 DS in his life, and everything they did was unexpected. Meeting and knowing Gold Roger's insanity was what inspired Katakuri to train his observation Haki to the pinnacle of power, but meeting Monkey D. Garp taught him that his predictions wouldn't always prepare him for whatever insanity AD would do. Meeting 2D boys wasn't out of Katakuri's expectations. Learning that they were only 11 and 8 years old wasn't entirely unexpected either, but it still made him question Garp's sanity. Why does he want me to teach these little brats? Still, he didn't need to know the details, so he suppressed the shock and curiosity in him. Meeting Portgast's Ace, on the other hand, made him glance at Garp in surprise. Katakuri recognized the hair and the eyes. The protective stance he held while he put his little brother behind him. The freckles, he had pondered, were likely from his mother. In any case, Katakuri was certain this was the rumored child of Gold Roger that the Marines were searching for when they had massacred several islands a dozen or so years ago. Then, Garp left after, lightly, hitting the 2 children's heads with Haki-infused fists. He was gone after a short shouting match with the 2 little DS, and he ended the argument by telling them that he expected Ace to become a fine Marine. And honestly? Katakuri had long since given up on questioning Garp's logic, but exactly how did the Vice Admiral expect the son of the Pirate King to become a Marine officer? And more importantly, he had let bandits raise the boy, and now, he was letting a notorious pirate train him. Well, Katakuri supposed he wouldn't actually know any child-raising techniques, so maybe he wasn't the best judge for the situation. In any case, it would be interesting to be involved with 2 children who would most likely shift the world's balance. He didn't need his Haki to know that because it was simply what people with the D in their names do. How a single letter in a name could dictate that universal law, Katakuri had no idea, but he was interested in how his influence would change their paths. It didn't take long for Katakuri to find out why Garp wanted him to teach his two grandsons observation Haki. The little one, Monkey D. Luffy, was blind. Lost his sight to some small-time pirates throwing their weight around in East Blue. Portgas, on the other hand, didn't need to learn per se, but the little one refused to stray too far from Portgas. And well, Katakuri supposed that it wouldn't hurt for both of them to learn observation Haki at a young age. And maybe, just maybe, he wanted to teach the Pirate King's son so that he'd be more ready to face the world. Katakuri was a firm believer that a child should not bear the sins of their parents. After all, he had first-hand experience with people hunting him because of what Mama had done. And well, he hoped that his teachings would make it easier for the young boy to survive. Even if it was only a little bit. So Katakuri stayed on the backwater island in East Blue to teach the two young boys the basics of Haki. He also ended up giving them some fighting and self-defense tips after seeing the two naturally draw in chaos. Luffy in particular just seemed to obliviously waltz right into the middle of trouble. At least Ace had some sense on what places to avoid. Katakuri had half the mind to think that it might be because the younger was blind, but a small voice in the back of his head told him it was simply a Monkey D thing. Of course everything would circle back to the D name. One of the moments Katakuri had to deal with, barely a week since he met them, was Luffy drowning. Thankfully, Ace had reacted quickly, like it was just another everyday occurrence. It was also when Katakuri found that the boy had consumed a devil fruit. Shishishi, I'm a rubber man. Luffy grinned while stretching his cheeks farther than what was humanly possible. A strange devil fruit, Katakuri duly noted. It was similar to his own, so he took it as another responsibility of his to teach, or at least give tips on, how the boy could use his devil fruit. He also started to speed up the training on observation Haki, forcefully awakening the power. He hoped that having Haki would minimize the trouble Luffy seemed to accidentally find. After all, Katakuri did not want to deal with an angry marine grandfather if Luffy happened to die because he couldn't see where he was stepping. It didn't take him long to realize that Luffy was used to such trouble. Apparently, he trusted Ace to fish him out from a gator's stomach. The practiced ease that Ace had, much like when he had saved the boy from drowning, made it clear that Luffy, even with sight, would have found himself in countless life-threatening situations. Katakuri found that training the two brats wasn't going to be as easy as he had anticipated. Not that he had expected it to be easy, especially considering they were both D brats. Well, it wasn't like he had a choice anymore. He had to return the life debt the Charlotte family owed to Garp, and training two helpless brats was truly one of the least resource-consuming repayments the Charlotte family had ever done. Katakuri sighed. Honestly, he was relieved to find that the two were also good kids. Somewhat independent and self-sufficient. Maybe a bit wild, jumping around the forest with ease. They were much better compared to some of his spoiled siblings back home. What made teaching them even more enjoyable was that they were talented. A month into the training, and both boys finally awakened their observation Haki. Luffy seemed to take up the task like a fish in water. He was naturally sensitive to people's presences. Or maybe, judging from the twitch of his nose and ears, he simply had great senses. The most fascinating part, however, was how he would sometimes unconsciously use color observation Haki. Meanwhile, Ace struggled a bit, which was reasonable for a child who still had working eyes. The freckled boy did eventually figure it out and started using it effectively to hunt the animals on Mt. Kalubo. It was progress, which satisfied the Charlotte commander. While Katakuri was strict with the boys, he didn't have any unreasonable expectations. It was good enough that they could sense people and their intentions. During the year he stayed on Dawn Island, Katakuri watched the brothers' daily spars, somehow got dragged into being a pillow for them. Machi is soft and comfy, Luffy had said excitedly, and became an unofficial big brother, which he reluctantly accepted because the two reminded him of his own siblings. Katakuri hadn't received any urgent calls from his family, only getting a call from Mama and Broly who just wanted to check on him and ask when he would return. It was a relief to know that his family hadn't been in any immediate danger. Still, he was feeling homesick, but thankfully, the one-year contract he had with Garp was ending. The night before Katakuri had to leave, the three laid down in his machi house, getting ready to sleep. Luffy and Ace stayed as close to him as possible. Well, more like Luffy refused to unwind his arms from around his chest. Ace was also on top of his chest, but his eyes were focused on the younger child. It was one of the few things Katakuri reprimanded the older child for doing, but old habits die hard. And he figured it was okay because Ace did have a decent grasp over his observation Haki. Katakuri, of course, could have gotten rid of them easily, but he let them do what they wanted. After all, he probably wouldn't see them again. Big brother Kuri, do you have to leave? Luffy's large eyes looked up, wide and sad. Truly, the silver, sightless eyes should have no business in showing so much emotion. A weaker man would have given in to the silent plea to stay, but Katakuri had several younger siblings with similar puppy eyes. Ace had shifted to tug on his sleeves but pretended to remain indifferent. With a sigh, the eldest of the three replied quietly, I have to return to my family. He understood the importance of family to the two, so he knew they would understand his dilemma. After seeing their disappointment in one of his future visions, he reluctantly added, I'm also a dangerous pirate. Against all expectations, the two looked up at him with excitement. Honestly, he had expected them to be more scared, considering Luffy had lost his sight to a pirate. But no, they were excited, and Luffy demanded to hear stories of his adventures. Ace was eager to hear some stories too, but he hid it well, for a child at least. Katakuri, too caught up in his surprise, asked blankly, I thought you two hated pirates. What? Both shouted in unison, which really made one wonder how they weren't blood-related. Pirates are cool. Luffy had finally released his hold around Katakuri's chest. His arms flailed wildly above them as if to explain how amazing pirates were. Shanks saved my life after I ate the Gomu Gomu no Mi. Shanks? Okay, that certainly was not a name Katakuri had expected to hear from a child's mouth. Yeah. He left the Gomu Gomu no Mi on Makino's counter, so I ate it because I thought it was dessert. Then some stupid mountain bandits came and almost killed me. Shanks, Ben, and Lucky Roo were super cool, but then the bandit went out to sea, got eaten by the Lord of the Coast, and Shanks saved me. He lost his arm too. Luffy frowned but quickly continued after his hand stopped to hold his straw hat proudly. I promised him that when I become a great pirate, I'll give his hat back. I'm gonna be the Pirate King. Katakuri raised an eyebrow in surprise. Perhaps he should be more concerned for a blind child chasing after a dream that hadn't been achieved by anyone in the last 12 years. Perhaps he should defend Mama's honor because she wanted to become Pirate King. And yet, the conviction in this child's voice somehow made Katakuri believe that there would be no other outcome. Monkey D. Luffy would become the Pirate King. In any case, he unexpectedly found some interesting information regarding the newest emperor. 2 years ago, red-haired Shanks, who had not yet been an emperor at the time, returned to the New World with a missing arm after being inactive for a year. Rumors of an unknown strong individual had spread throughout the New World, and those with wider information networks had become cautious of a hidden tiger in the weakest blues. And yet, to think that it was merely a sea king, not even half the size of the sea kings that nested in the Calm Belt. To think that one of the strongest pirates currently alive lost his arm to protect a child from a tiny sea king. Fascinating. He would have to find the Emperor and speak to him about Luffy. Katakuri put the revelation aside and looked at Ace. A silent question on why the Pirate King's child wanted to be a pirate. Katakuri had long since figured out the hate the boy felt for his biological father, so why would he become what his father used to be? Ace quietly answered with narrowed eyes, I just want to be recognized for me. I want people to see me as Portgasty Ace. Plus, his lips twisted in disgust, I'm not going to work for the people who killed our other brother. Finding out that they had a third brother was certainly a surprise, but Katakuri didn't ask. He merely nodded, not quite in understanding but more of a reassuring gesture, then grow up and maybe one day we'll meet up at sea. The sea was wide and vast, and people often never met again. Still, Katakuri couldn't bring himself to say he'd never see them again. And perhaps, as DS who constantly shattered people's common sense, perhaps they would meet again several years into the future. The two children seemed satisfied with the answer and plopped down to sleep. He would probably have to pull them off him tomorrow when he set sail to return to Mama, but for now, he would spoil them while he still had the chance. He wouldn't be able to take care of such precious and vulnerable children when he was with his biological siblings. After returning to Whole Cake Island, Katakuri would occasionally wonder how and why he had developed such a soft spot for Portgasty Ace and Monkey D. Luffy. Perhaps it was the deeply concealed loneliness within their eyes that reminded him of his childhood when Mama had left to wage war. Perhaps it was the strong dependency and protective relationship the two brothers had that reminded him of his own family. In any case, Katakuri looked forward to whatever storm they would bring forth when they set sail. Meeting up with red-haired Shanks before returning to Whole Cake Island was definitely not within Katakuri's expectations. He had simply stopped by a small town in paradise when drunken laughter resounded behind him. His future vision informed him of who it was. He found a bench to sit on before sighing. He didn't bother waiting for the other redhead pirate to greet him. Akagami. Dahahaha, that dude looks like Charlotte Katakuri. Captain, it is Katakuri. Ah yes, possibly the only voice of reason in the Red Hair Pirates. For the many crews who sailed the Grand Line, Ben Beckman was certainly the favorite member of the Red Hair Pirates. Akagami was simply a difficult man to deal with. I am returning from a mission in East Blue. Huh? What would that big-shot billion-berry commander be doing here in paradise? He didn't give a response to the next vision and merely stared, deadpan, at the Emperor. Holy sheet! It really is him with his creepy future sight thingy, Shanks exclaimed. He surprisingly appeared to be sober now, but the man would never disappoint his unofficial title as the Party Emperor, a title that both pirates and marines alike agreed was childish and inappropriate for a pirate as strong as Shanks. Great! Let's party! Katakuri sighed. He wanted to sink deeper into the bench and ignore the Emperor, but there really wasn't much he could do. Instead, he said, a little monkey in East Blue told me that your arm was eaten by a baby sea king. Okay, maybe that wasn't the best thing to say, but out of all the visions he had seen, this result was the most civil. Oddly so. Katakuri felt a wave of Haki pressing down on him. He watched as Ben Beckman pointed his rifle at him. Katakuri was certain that the gun was loaded with seastone bullets. That reminded him of why Beckman was among the least favorite red hair pirate for most devil fruit users. People had long since learned about the endless patience the red hair's first mate had. He seemed to have a limitless supply of seastone bullets, which meant he often used his time to slowly whittle down seastone to fit his rifle. Garp invited me to stay for a year to teach his grandsons Haki. What did you do? The heavy pressure was lifted off his shoulders, but Beckman didn't drop his rifle. Katakuri calmly explained, answering the questions he could hear with his future sight. A small-time pirate beat up Luffy to the point he became blind. I was brought over to be his teacher. Why? No, Katakuri denied. You and Anchor became friends? Yes. Ah, the Charlotte commander thought briefly. That sounded like the answer to the question just now. He sighed. Akagami truly was a hard man to deal with. Well, at least the assumed affirmation had made Beckman lower his rifle. Dahahaha, I knew Anchor could charm everyone he meets. That kid got some spunk. Wait, Luffy is blind? According to his brother, he was beaten by spiked gloves, threatened by a sword, and nearly burned to death. How? This was about a month before Garp dragged me over to Dawn Island, so a little over a year ago. When? Katakuri waited for the pirate captain to process the information. He was doing well when I left. How is he? Yes. He and his brother are talented and hard workers. They made good progress over the year. And he is 9 years old. His brother is now 12. That's good. So, observation Haki, huh? The kid is what? 7, 8 years old? I don't know the whole story, but I believe Garp made Luffy live with Ace and some mountain bandits after you left. Anchor has a brother? He was the only kid back in Fusha. Katakuri chose to remain silent and stood up, fully intending to escape. Shanks grinned and quickly grabbed onto the Charlotte commander's arm. He took another swig of his sake, dahahaha. Ben, go tell everyone we're having a party. We need to celebrate finding Katakuri and Anchor's friendship. The taller redhead sighed while watching Beckman shake his head. We gotta thank Charlotte for bringing news of Anchor to us, Shanks sang drunkenly while half-dancing toward the beach. Dahaha, little Anchor has learned Haki. I knew he would be a force to reckon with. After Katakuri left, Shanks crawled over to Ben complaining about his hangover. He hummed in pain when Ben suddenly asked, Captain, how is Luffy gonna set sail if he's blind? Observation Haki doesn't help with navigation. Shanks shot up at the question and winced, sheet. Do you think he'll set sail with his brother? Shanks blinked twice and tried to remember what Katakuri had told him about this mysterious ace. He also remembered that the boy was a D.F. He replied gracelessly. DS don't sail under the same flags. Oh, F-, those 3 stupid DS probably didn't even think about that. Ben blinked at him, so, does that mean he'll just drift at sea once he sets sail? Maybe Katakuri had a plan for that? Shanks said hopefully. I think he was also under the impression that the two brothers would set sail together. FINGDS. Of all the things Koby expected to see after 2 years of slaving away on Alvida's ship, it most certainly was not a teenager, maybe a few years older than himself, with sunglasses and a straw hat. The teen's red vest was buttoned up, and he wore blue shorts with white fluff at the bottom. His sandals and sunglasses made it seem as though he was on vacation. If Koby hadn't seen the man popping out of a barrel, the pink-haired boy would have thought the man really was on vacation. But no, the teen was not on vacation and had apparently been sleeping in said barrel. Ah, that was a nice nap. The raven-haired boy stretched. He tilted his head and jumped towards Koby. Hey! I'm Luffy. Where are we? Koby, unsure of what to do, replied awkwardly, "We're on Iron Mace Alvida's island. I'm Koby." "Okay, not important." Koby blinked. "Huh?" He quietly listened to the other teen, Luffy, talk about how he got there. He spoke casually yet confidently. A small part inside Koby wished he could be like this person. Then, Luffy grinned widely, "I'm gonna become the Pirate King." If Koby could see the eyes hidden beneath the shades, he was certain that they would be sparkling with excitement. Koby couldn't help but open his mouth in denial because, surely, such a dream couldn't come true, right? "That's impossible," he sputtered. "People die trying to find the One Piece." All he got in response was a fist to his head and a large scowl. "What was that for? I thought you were a good guy because you have a little bit of white and red in you. But you have this really ugly yellow, and that's because you're a coward." "Stupid," Luffy replied. "I'm not afraid of dying. It's my dream, and that's why I don't mind dying for it." Koby couldn't help but stare at the teenager, man, before him. He stuttered out his dream from his childhood. "Will I also? Can I accomplish my dream? Will I be able to become a Marine? I dunno. Then, I'll become a Marine. I'd rather die trying to get out of here and join the Marines. I'll be able to arrest people like Alvida." Luffy grinned and suddenly grabbed onto Koby. The younger struggled for a brief moment before he froze as soon as he heard Alvida's shout. Terror momentarily took over his body, but not even 5 minutes later, Koby watched Luffy quickly defeat the female pirate. And so, the pink-haired boy decided to follow this teenage pirate, curious about the journey and where they would go. After the whole debacle of Shell's Town, Koby found himself working for the Marines thanks to Luffy. Only a month or two later, Koby found himself on Vice Admiral Garp's ship. He was in awe of the Marine hero, and his presence reminded him of Luffy. "I heard you got here thanks to Luffy, huh?" Garp casually said while picking his nose. "Eh?" Koby replied, panicked. "How did the Marine hero know?" "You must be a good guy if he let you sail with him, even if it was only for a few days," Garp continued. "The boy might not have eyes anymore, but he's still a great judge of character." Koby hesitated. "Garp-san, do you know Luffy-san?" "Bahahaha, of course I do. He's my grandson." Then the other words began to register in Koby's mind. "Garp-san, what do you mean he might not have eyes?" He didn't tell you? Luffy is blind." The pink-haired boy blinked twice. Helmeppo, who was also beside him, choked on his drink. Luffy-san is blind? That brat is blind? He didn't tell you? Oops, forget I said that. Bwahahaha, Garp laughed loudly. Koby stared blankly into space, processing the information. Luffy had walked around with such ease and confidence. Koby simply had no idea the pirate was actually blind. Thinking back though, there were a few clues such as how the other teen never looked at anyone in the eye, though the sunglasses did hide that fact, how he didn't even own a map despite sailing a ship, and well, simply not knowing how to navigate. Also the way he asked for the general direction of where a person was rather than what they looked like. Asking for the restaurant owner to bring out whatever was available rather than reading the menu, though that just might be a Luffy thing. Everything made sense except, how did Luffy know where everything was? Did he have a special method to detect people? He turned to Garp, hoping to get an answer to his question, only to find the man happily snoozing. With a sigh, Koby took a mental note to ask the question later. "I'm Luffy. Join my crew." Zoro looked down from the stake he was hanging on. A teen with a straw hat and sunglasses grinned at him. The swordsman scoffed, "Whatever. You're definitely gonna join." The so-called pirate started to walk away. "Oi," Zoro called out and glanced at the ground. "Can you pick that up for me?" Luffy stood there silently. "Pick what up?" "The rice ball the little girl came with?" "Oh. Where is it?" The pirate knelt on the ground and started patting around. Zoro growled, "Oi, are you blind or something? It's right in front of you." Luffy only hummed and swept the ground with his hands until he touched the dirted rice ball. "Yeah, I am blind." "How'd you know?" Zoro didn't get a chance to answer because Luffy walked away right after stuffing the rice ball into the swordsman's mouth. He shouted quickly, "Tell the little girl the rice ball was good." "Shishishi, okay." It was only a few minutes later when Zoro wondered if this Luffy person would be able to identify the little girl that brought him food. Zoro's captain was strange. There wasn't really any other word he could use to describe Luffy. After all, what sane and normal person set sail when they were blind? Maybe Zoro was the idiot for agreeing to become the first mate of a blind captain. Oh, well. Too late for regrets. Honestly, he wasn't sure what exactly a first mate did, so Zoro just tagged along and followed this strange captain of his. It didn't really matter what Luffy would do as long as it didn't interfere with his own dream and promise. Of all the bloody things that Buggy expected to face in his little town in East Blue, it was definitely not a teenage boy with a high level of observation haki. Not really sensitive like his own, but the boy had great control over his observation haki. And to make things worse, the teenager had Shanks' old straw hat. What the hell? Not only that, but the boy had color observation haki. A very rudimentary and basic color observation, but it was there. And with the way he fought? He could definitely see a few seconds into the future. Buggy needed a drink. Worse still was that he was a Monkey D. Luffy, the boy with a straw hat and sunglasses said. Fingds. At least Buggy was skilled enough with his own haki control to hide his true intentions and presence. He might not have a wide variety of observation haki skills like the young pirate he just met, but he was proud of the meticulous control he had with his haki. He could freely hide his haki signature while keeping his range of observation over the entire island. Although, Buggy didn't completely hide his signature, just made it weak, because otherwise, the kid would find some of his secrets. Buggy did not want that. No, thank you. It would only bring him trouble. After fighting for some time with the newbie pirate, Buggy also found that the kid was blind. What the f dash? The kid was just as insane as Monkey D. Garp. Fing Monkey DS. Buggy needed more than one drink. Maybe more than two. That menace was finally gone, and Buggy took the chance to call his former fellow cabin boy. What the f dash, Shanks? You gave Captain's old hat to a blind brat? The redhead had the audacity to laugh through the den mushy. And did you teach him observation haki? To a kid in the backwaters of East Blue? Buggy was fuming. He needed answers. And at least 5 shots of whiskey. Shanks finally stopped cackling, but his grin was still evident through the transponder snail. To be fair, Anchor wasn't blind when I met him, and no, Charlotte Katakuri taught him observation. Personally recruited by Garp apparently. Ah, sheet. Buggy wanted to cry. How did fighting with a newbie pirate like Monkey D. Luffy suddenly involve him in 2 Yonko crews? Dealing with Shanks was more than enough, thank you very much. By the way, his brother got promoted to Ol Newgate's second commander, about a year ago. Oh, Buggy was actually about to cry now. The kid somehow had connections with 3 Yonko crews. What's next? Buggy weakly asked. He gonna be the illegitimate kid of Kaido or something? Dahahaha, Shanks laughed loudly. You owe me like 10 drinks, Shanks. Buggy exclaimed. He was done with this sheet. Despite his love for all his flashy bombs and appearances, there was a reason he decided to hide in East Blue, and it sure as hell wasn't to somehow get involved with a kid related to almost every single powerhouse on the ocean. Buggy sighed. He supposed it was time for him to return to the damnable Grand Line. The world was shifting, and he needed to help make his crew stronger if they wanted to last through the era. Ah, if only they could hide and never appear, but the moment they met Monkey D. Luffy, Buggy knew their only choices were either to get stronger or enter Davy Jones' locker. Luffy hummed while Nami moved their ship to shore. He could feel 4 presences ahead, one of which was oddly familiar. Something he hadn't felt before, yet also someone he had met before. A friend, or something similar. The air on the island was obviously one belonging to the waters of East Blue, and it reminded him of the pirates he had met before he had lost his sight. Well, minus the fact the color he felt from the largest of the people before him was a bright yellow of cowardice. Mixed within it all, however, were orange and red subtly peeking out. A desire for bravery, Luffy decided. To sail the seas and achieve the greatest dream. A brave warrior of the sea. He smiled at the thought. I just noticed, Zoro spoke up, what are those guys doing there? Luffy grinned. He supposed those 4 weren't hiding very well. The 3 smaller presences ran away while the brave warrior shouted in panic. This person was funny. Luffy liked him already. I am the great pirate fellet leader, Usopp, who is in charge of the security of this village. I'm also known as Captain Usopp. Luffy furrowed his brows, hearing the familiar name. Now, where had he heard this name before? Luffy is certain someone told him about a boy named Usopp? It's best if you don't try to attack this village because my 80 million men are not going to forgive you. Nami seemed to have taken an annoyed color and simply said, You're lying, right? Wah! I've been caught. Luffy openly grinned, ha ha ha, you're so funny. The young captain continued to smile as he and his 2 crew members followed Usopp to the town for food. Luffy decided he really liked this Usopp guy. After all, he brought them to all this delicious food. Luffy simply ate the food given to him while he felt Usopp's fondness as well as empathy for the girl living in the mansion in the village. Again, the way this fondness was expressed was strikingly familiar to someone. Luffy still couldn't quite place where he felt this before. Luffy frowned but decided to toss the thought aside. He could figure it out later. Luffy grimaced as he approached the mansion on the hill. He could feel quite a few people inside, mostly people who were obviously regular civilians. He could feel Usopp's hesitation and joy while speaking to someone whose presence was clearly growing weaker by the day. And then there was that one ugly, dark feeling. Luffy hadn't felt it often back on Dawn, but it was similar to that axe dude he fought. It was a bad feeling. Luffy didn't like it. Not one bit. The feeling was confirmed when that bad man started insulting Usopp and his family. If there was one thing Luffy hated the most, it was someone insulting family. Still, this guy helped Luffy remember who Usopp reminded him of. Luffy hummed. After helping the kids shout at the bad idiot man, he started searching for Usopp. It was a simple matter. Luffy had been able to extend his observation haki across MT Kalubo, so all he had to do was search for Usopp's presence on this island. Now, the problem was how to approach Usopp. Well, Luffy would just go up to him just like how he had with Ace. So he popped up right around Usopp. He wanted to be in front of Usopp, but he couldn't be certain about his relative position to the other teenager. With the way Usopp backed away instead of turning around, it seemed Luffy got the right spot though. Your dad is Usopp, right? Luffy tilted his head, causing his sunglasses to slip lower on his nose. How'd you know that? Luffy grinned at the expected answer. He pushed his sunglasses back into place. Ace told him it was important to keep them on at all times. I've known him since I was a kid. You've got the same feeling as Usopp. You've got blood belonging to a brave warrior of the sea, Luffy replied as he tried to recall what he could about the pirate he met several years ago. He could barely remember what Usopp looked like. Hell, he had a hard time remembering what anyone looked like. He just remembered Ace had freckles. Sabo had blonde hair, a missing tooth, and a blue hat. Makino had a nice smile. And Shanks's head was really red. Even so, Luffy could recall the feeling he had when he first met the red-haired pirates. Luffy might not know the exact feeling of the men who shaped his early life, but what he could remember was enough for him to relate it back to Usopp. Luffy was certain Usopp was the same as his father, the sea called for his presence. Luffy laughed at the memory. Usopp was a really popular pirate. Is that really true? Usopp's color started lightening up. Luffy sat on the grass as he listened to Usopp speak proudly. To tell you the truth, even though he left me for the sea, I'm always proud of my dad. But that bstrd Klahadore looked down on him. He looked down on my pride. Yup. I don't like him at all. Luffy frowned. He has a bad feeling coming from him. Especially right now. He pointed somewhere in the direction of the sea. There was another person there whose color was more gray than anything else. Both teens sat atop the cliff and listened as Klahadore and the stranger spoke. Usopp peered over the edge while Luffy continued to sit and merely tilted his head to hear their conversation better. So, are you all prepared? Of course. We can start Operation Assassinate Ojusama any time. Klahadore didn't understand what was going on. He was confident his speed was superior to this child, but the boy dodged all of his attacks as if he could see the future. The former pirate stared at the boy with the straw hat and sunglasses. Those Dmed glasses. Klahadore hated them. It covered the teen's eyes and made it harder for him to get a grasp of the boy's composure. Dmed straw hat, Klahadore cursed as he finally found an opening to kick the boy. The hat fell, but the sunglasses remained undamaged on the boy's face. He stared forward in irritation as his former crew started calling him by the name he had abandoned. Klahadore angrily shouted, "Stop calling me that. I've killed that name already. I've spent 3 years to complete my plan." He leaped towards the kid as he spoke. "I can't let you disrupt my plans." Klahadore watched again as the boy blocked his claws with a block of stone as if he already knew he would attack. His claws snapped, and the butler was pulled forward, losing his balance. The rock being carried by the kid was then smashed down onto his head. Klahadore couldn't hear what the brat said while his head was ringing. The former pirate growled as he stood back up. Those people were still calling him captain. They were too fing noisy. "Shut up. All of you will die after this. I never intended on letting any of you leave the village." Klahadore felt deeply satisfied and laughed at their naive reactions. Of course they would die. Anyone who knew his plans was a risk to exposing his identity. In any case, they were all simply pawns to him. He returned his attention to the kid he was fighting and found that he had the gall to smirk at him. "Even though you're the captain of a ship who controls hundreds of men, you still can't defeat Usopp." Kuro sneered. "Me? Inferior to that captain in a kid's pirate game." "That's right." Klahadore moved behind the kid, but again, his move seemed to have been predicted already. "Ugh," he grunted as he received a swing of the kid's fist to his face. He took a deep breath and decided he would use his ultimate attack. It was all a means to an end after all. As long as everyone died, the Klahadore's plan would be a success. Luffy sensed the pain of the people around him as the evil butler started attacking his own crew. He had known that Haki wasn't good. He had that ugly color and feeling that Luffy never liked. He had similar feelings when he faced Sabo's father as well as Blue Jam. Back then, it wasn't as pronounced because he didn't have Haki, but after learning from Big Brother Kuri, Luffy understood why he didn't like those men. It was the same now. Luffy shouted angrily, "Just what do you think your crewmates are?" He took a deep breath and tried to sense the evil butler again with his Haki. The man was fast. Faster than most people Luffy had previously met, but he could still predict where Haki would go. It would have been easier if his future sight could read as far as Big Brother Kuri, but it was enough for now. Behind. Luffy reached behind him and grabbed onto Haki's shirt as soon as he appeared in that spot. He threw the butler to the ground and spoke firmly, "I will never, ever be a pirate like you." Luffy reached out to grab at Haki to keep him in place. He didn't need to hear the butler's answer. After all, he already heard everything with his observation Haki. "Die? I won't die here," Luffy grinned. "Gomu Gomu no bell." "You," Nami hesitated. "Why did you get mad earlier?" She held Luffy's straw hat in her right hand and the bag of looted goods in her left. She patiently waited for his answer. "I don't like them. They're wrong." "What are you talking about?" "They're pirates," Nami scoffed. She really couldn't understand what Luffy was thinking. He was brainless and just charged straight ahead. "I want meat." Nami huffed. She figured that was Luffy's default answer when he didn't want to answer something. Well, she had something else she wanted to ask anyway. "When you were fighting Klahadore, it was like you already knew where he was going to step. How did you do that?" "You were like that when you fought with Buggy too." "Shishishi," Luffy laughed. "I used a super cool mystery power." "What?" "Big Brother Kuri taught me after I couldn't see anymore." Luffy smiled as he reached for his hat. Nami blinked as she watched the young boy seemingly reach around blindly for his hat. She was holding it right in front of him. Surely he could see that? It took another few seconds before she partially understood what Luffy just said. "Wait. What do you mean you couldn't see anymore?" "I lost my sight when I was 8. Luffy cheerfully replied. His fingers brushed over the cloth carrying her treasure. "It was really scary, but Gramps brought Big Brother Kuri who taught me how to sense my surroundings. He said when I train my Haki enough, I can see into the future for a little bit." Nami needed the young pirate captain to slow down because, really, what did she just hear? "Haki? No, wait, stop. You're blind?" "Yep." He finally managed to brush his hand on his hat, which he grabbed and immediately placed back onto his head. The navigator gaped for a moment, unsure of how to respond. "Oh, and Nami," Luffy smiled and reached out to pat her head, "you're sad and lonely, but it's okay because you have us." After Usopp and his friends left, Kaya spoke with Mary a little bit. It was then that she found out that Luffy was blind. Nami had told Mary when they were discussing how to navigate with the caravel. Learning this little bit of Luffy was surprising because he walked and talked like any other person she had met. Kaya wasn't sure if Usopp knew, but surely, he would find out soon. While she was worried, she figured everything would be okay. She couldn't, and wouldn't, stop Usopp from chasing his dreams. Even though Luffy was blind, he had miraculously defeated Kuro. Surely, Usopp would be alright with these new friends of his. In any case, it wasn't like Kaya had an actual choice in the matter. It was Usopp's choice to follow the man after all. She trusted Usopp to follow the path meant for him. With renewed motivation, Kaya decided that she would also follow her dreams. She would become a skilled doctor and welcome the Straw Hat crew with open arms when they returned. If the blind Luffy could set sail to pursue his dreams to be Pirate King, then she could learn to be a doctor in her small village. If the cowardly Usopp could take the first step to become a brave warrior of the seas, then she would take the first step to find where she could learn medical practices. Kaya would fret and worry over every single new scar that was visible in the papers, but she knew they would be okay. As for her, she could only stay to keep Syrup Village safe and healthy. She would stay to ensure there would be a home for Usopp to return to and his nakama to visit. Going Merry was a lovely ship. Usopp absolutely adored it. He spent most of his time indoors, exploring the small spaces under deck. One of his favorite activities while on the ship was checking and maintaining the armaments, which was a total of 4 cannons. It wasn't much, but still more compared to what Usopp had to work with when he was at Syrup Village. Then, one morning, he came out on deck and found one of the cannons sitting harmlessly while facing starboard. It was odd, but the moment he saw Luffy standing next to it, he realized it was probably for some test shooting. Usopp sighed when he saw the teen hopelessly shoot into the ocean. The sniper grinned because now he could show just how amazing he was. He approached the straw hat-wearing teen and proclaimed, "Let the great Captain Usopp show you how it's done." Luffy merely cheered, "Cool. You see that rock over there? Nope. That's the rock I'm gonna hit. Usopp paused. Wait, what do you mean you can't see that rock? Usopp watched Luffy tilt his head like Usopp was being weird. The teenager simply shrugged. I can't see anything. You can't see? That's right. Like, can't see as in you're? I dunno, blind? Uh-huh. Oh, okay. Wait, no, you're blind. Shishishi, yep. Usopp waved his hands in confusion. But, you walk around so. He tried to find the words and ended up plainly saying, so normally. Usopp couldn't understand what Luffy was saying. It didn't make sense. If Luffy was blind, how did he defeat Kuro? How did he walk around? How did he know where everyone was? Oh, I learned a mystery power that let me see stuff without my eyes. The sniper bit his lips as he recalled all his previous interactions with Luffy. Luffy never looked him in the eye, but Usopp simply excused it to the fact he always had sunglasses on. You've got the same feeling as Usopp. You've got blood belonging to a brave warrior of the sea. Usopp hadn't understood what Luffy really meant except that he also had pirate's blood running through his veins. The description was confusing too because why would he compare his overall feeling and vibe? Why didn't Luffy just say that he looked like his father? Suddenly, it all made sense. If Luffy had that mystery power that let him see stuff without his eyes, then didn't that mean the way he perceived the world was different? If that was the case, then it made sense for Luffy to describe his father the way he did. It made sense for Luffy to describe people based on how they feel to him rather than their appearance. At the same time, Usopp wasn't sure if Luffy would be able to describe the way someone looked even if he could see. Usopp was pulled from his thoughts when Luffy shouted, Zoro. Nami. I think there are some people at that rock. Zeff could not tell if the boy who had basically destroyed a part of his restaurant was simply a naturally clumsy person. He had already destroyed countless plates in the kitchen, stolen some food, botched the customers' orders, and even gave out the wrong dishes. The boy was basically every restaurant's nightmare. Well, at least the kid hadn't freaked out over his missing leg. Didn't even look at it, which was a new reaction for a first meeting. Although, even if he did glance at his missing leg, Zeff wouldn't have been able to tell because of the DMN sunglasses. And speaking of sunglasses, maybe the kid would have worked better if he had taken them off while walking around inside of the restaurant. It would have also made him look less like someone on vacation and more like a waiter. But the kid had refused to take it off. Said something about how his brother told him to keep it on at all times to protect his eyes from the sun. Maybe he was blind, Zeff mused. Well, the brat was old enough to set sail, so he was probably capable of taking care of himself. Zeff himself recalled fighting a few partially blinded opponents. He refused to remember the ones who mocked him by fighting him with their eyes closed. Well, it didn't matter if the stubborn brat kept his glasses on or not, Zeff figured and simply kicked the boy back to the kitchen. Just work to pay off your debt. Okay. Dracul Mihawk's strengths did not lie in observation Haki, but he had honed his senses enough to recognize when someone else watched him with Haki. That certainly wasn't what he was expecting to feel in East Blue as he approached the galleon which had previously disturbed his nap. How curious, Mihawk thought as he easily deflected the bullets meant to kill him. Well, no matter, the one who sensed him held no malice towards him. Rather, he was more curious about the green-haired boy. He stood before him with determination. What do you aim for? To be the strongest, the boy grinned. You said you're free, right? So let's have a duel. Pitiful, Mihawk sighed. If you're a competent swordsman by any means, then I can demonstrate the difference in our strengths without crossing blades. Yet you still dare to challenge me? Where does your bravery come from? Your conviction? Or ignorance? The strongest swordsman looked down in disdain. It comes from my ambition, his opponent responded, and a promise to a friend. The answer certainly wasn't what he was expecting, but it was a good answer. Mihawk liked the answer, so he would give this boy some respect by using Kagatana. Kagatana might be his smallest sword, but at the very least, he was using a blade. Still, against someone so young, it was a shame Mihawk didn't have a smaller blade. Mihawk's expression remained still, but his heart leaped with excitement. He hadn't expected to meet such a swordsman in East Blue. Tell me your name, Mihawk said simply. Roronoa Zoro. Roronoa Zoro. Mihawk pulled Yoru from his back. I shall remember it. To pay respect to you as a fellow swordsman, I shall end this duel with Yoru, the world's strongest sword. He exchanged sword blows with this boy, Roronoa Zoro, one final time, breaking two of his swords in the process. He turned around to place the last slash and watched as Roronoa turned around, exposing his torso openly. A wound on one's back is the shame of a swordsman. Mihawk grinned. This was certainly much more fun than killing time by chasing a broken band of pirates. Splendid. Zoro! Luffy shouted. He could still feel Zoro's presence even through the ocean. It was weak, but still there. He would live. He would live. Still, that didn't mean Luffy wasn't angry. He moved to attack Mihawk but stopped as his future sight showed he would simply crash into the drowning galleon. Instead, Luffy settled for glaring at the swordsman. Though, if Luffy really thought about it, his glare likely wasn't seen by the swordsman. Still, Luffy was certain he was able to convey his ire. Mihawk glanced up and found a familiar straw hat atop a boy wearing sunglasses. If he recalled correctly, this was the boy red-haired spoke of nearly a decade ago. It was likely the same boy he spoke of 8 years ago. Monkey D. Luffy. A boy with big ambitions but lost his sight to the cruelty of the world. This boy was likely the one who sensed him through Haki earlier. Regardless, he unexpectedly encountered something interesting on this trip to East Blue. It seemed his future adversary was friends with the boy red-haired made a bet on all those years ago. Fitting, Mihawk turned away towards Roronoa who had been pulled up by his comrades. I am Dracula Mihawk. It is far too early for you to die. Become strong, Roronoa. I shall wait for you at the top of the world. Forge on ahead and try to surpass my sword. Surpass me, Roronoa. After speaking for so long with the green-haired swordsman, Mihawk returned his attention to the boy Shanks spoke of so fondly. Boy, what do you aim for? Pirate King. Mihawk smirked. The boy was just as Shanks described. A tough path. Even tougher than surpassing myself. Bah! Luffy harumphed. I'm going to do what I want. Mihawk chuckled to himself after watching Roronoa Zoro and Monkey D. Luffy exchange vows. How delightful. He truly didn't waste any time by coming to the weakest blues. You make a good team, he said plainly as he sailed away. I'd like to see you two again sometime in the future. And I'll likely have to speak to red-haired Shanks about the boy he made a bet on. Sanji wasn't sure how he ended up getting this annoying tale as he walked around to serve the food. All he had done was provide food for a starving man, and now this straw hat kid was following him and telling him to be a cook on his pirate ship. The blonde had already told the kid he wouldn't be leaving. After all, who else would help protect that old man's treasure? Sanji owed at least that much to the head chef of Baratai. Sanji struggled to understand the fury the errand boy was expressing. How could the boy claim that his method to repay his debt was stupid? How else was he supposed to return the life debt he owed to the old geezer? Staying here to protect the restaurant with his life. That was what he should do, right? You're an idiot, the errand boy huffed and used his left hand, the one that wasn't holding on to Sanji's collar, to take off his sunglasses. Sanji blinked as he stared at the silver eyes which couldn't seem to find his own eyes. And yet, it felt as though the eyes were staring straight through his soul. The old man didn't save your life so you could die here. What? You won't repay your debt by dying. But, even I can see that. I dash. And I don't have the eyes to see that, you bstrd. H dash. You're going to live to fulfill the dream you and that old man share. Sanji couldn't understand how the errand boy, Luffy, his name was Luffy, could so passionately claim his dreams with no hesitation. It was a dream that people would often laugh at, much like his own dream. And yet, this boy, probably a few years younger than himself, shouted his dreams to the world with so much energy and conviction. It was inspiring, and Sanji wondered if he could be like that one day. Actually, Sanji knew he could. He just needed to take a step forward and accept Luffy's offer to be his cruise chef. It was simple. But no, he owed the old geezer too much. The younger part of Sanji, the part that never really disappeared, whispered quietly that it was best if he didn't follow. It was best if he remained with the man he considered his real father because he would only become a burden for Luffy and his crew. Sanji sat outside beside the door and listened as his fellow chef spoke to the Straw Hat captain. The old geezer himself asked, "Would you mind taking that lil eggplant with you?" The blonde chef froze. "Take him to the Grand Line. It's his dream." He couldn't see their grins, but he could hear them all cheerfully shouting to drink more of his soup. Sanji buried his head into his arms and knees. "Bstrds," he mumbled. "I can still hear you all." Sanji laughed to himself. At himself. He thought back to the words Luffy had said and finally spoke up, "I'll go. Take me with you." "What?" "I'll follow you in your journey to become the Pirate King. We both have crazy dreams, so I'll tag along to fulfill mine," he casually said. "I'll be the cook for your ship." Despite his casual agreement, Sanji's head worried if Luffy's offer would be taken away. Surely, he wouldn't want someone who already rejected him? Luffy's sudden shout pulled him from such thoughts. Sounds great. They were leaving. Sanji was leaving this place. The first place he ever considered his actual home. Sanji teared up and readily cried as he bade farewell to the chefs of Baratai. "Let's meet again one day. You good for nothing bstrds." They finally set sail, away from Baratai and Sanji wiped his face to rid them of tears. Beside him, Luffy grinned, "They're good guys." "You are too, Sanji." "Humph," Sanji puffed out a smoke, pretending he hadn't cried just minutes ago. "So you're blind?" "Yep." "Okay. Any allergies?" Nami wasn't sure if this was what she wanted to do. She had resolved herself to only take money to save her village, but she wasn't sure if abandoning someone like Luffy was the right thing to do. She wasn't sure if Belmere would approve of leaving someone like Luffy behind. "You're sad and lonely, but it's okay because you have us." The navigator recalled the words Luffy said after his fight with Kuro on Gecko Island. No one had said that to her before. Nami had always been alone. Nami had always pushed people away. And yet, here was a boy who smiled like the sun. A boy who smiled like the world hadn't wronged him by making him lose his eyesight. Here was a boy, an entire year younger than herself, who told her that she wasn't alone. Nami bit her lips as tears began forming in her eyes. She should be used to this by now. Luffy was a pirate. Luffy was someone who cared. It didn't matter anymore though. She left. She abandoned them. She was alone again, and she would finally save her village from the tyrant of her childhood. Luffy was here. Luffy was here. Nami didn't understand why. She told him to leave already. This was her home. This was her responsibility. Why didn't he just leave? Why didn't he just listen to her? He shouldn't be involved with her problem. It was none of his business. Luffy would never listen to her anger. Luffy, Nami gripped her hands at the dirt of her hometown as tears poured from her eyes. She didn't deserve to ask this of him. Still, she turned her tear-stricken face and pleaded, "Help me." She felt Luffy place his treasured hat atop her head and watched as he took a deep breath. "Of course I will." Luffy's shout echoed, and it felt like the world could hear his every word. Luffy would always listen to her sorrows. Luffy grinned as he listened to Nami read the newspaper. Apparently he had gotten himself a bounty. Wasn't that great? "How much does it say?" Luffy asked excitedly. He hoped it was higher than Ace's starting bounty. Even if it wasn't, it was okay though because Luffy would someday surpass Ace's bounty. After all, he was going to become the Pirate King. 30 million, Nami lamented. "Your life is at risk now." Luffy merely shrugged while feeling her genuine worry. He was prepared to die the moment he set out. Having a bounty just meant he was known to the world. "We can't afford to stay around in East Blue anymore," Nami sighed. Of the people on Going Merry, Luffy could feel that only Nami was worried. Zoro was calm and indifferent, while Sanji and Usopp were simply excited for the future ahead. Luffy laughed brightly. He was satisfied with this crew he found in East Blue. Their adventure was just starting. The moment Luffy stepped on the island, he could feel a heavy presence coming from the center. It felt as though something, or someone, was speaking to him, but he couldn't quite tell what. Well, not that it mattered. He would simply go to where the Pirate King spoke his last words, "I'm gonna go to the execution stand." Sanji replied that he would get some food and Usopp was going to get some stuff to build some other cool things. Zoro said he wanted a sword. It made sense. After all, ever since Zoro lost 2 of his swords to that Haki guy, the one that was still intact felt kind of lonely. Luffy didn't really understand, but Zoro said it was fine. Luffy walked off while the rest did their thing. He followed the aura in the center of the town, avoiding as many people as he could in the crowded streets. He focused on his breathing to prevent himself from being overwhelmed by the sheer number of people around him. He finally arrived where he felt the all-encompassing Haki seeping out from and listened to the people around him whisper how this was where the Pirate King had died. The execution stand. My treasure? Luffy tilted his head. It felt as though he had heard something. He thought he had already blocked off the crowd's whispers. No matter, Luffy simply wanted to touch the execution stand. If you want it, I'll grant it. That voice was there again. It was getting louder as he approached the platform. Search on. Big Brother Curry never said something like this would happen. It seemed as though the execution platform was speaking to him. Luffy climbed up the scaffold with ease. He stood at the top and felt as the air around him changed. It was odd. Luffy didn't understand quite what was going on. All the world had to offer. Something started bearing down on him, and Luffy struggled to breathe. It was similar to Haki but different. He tried stretching out his observation Haki, but something was pressing down on it. It had been years since he couldn't feel or see a presence, and it should have been scary. Instead, it was as though he was taken to another place to experience something he couldn't see. He heard the mysterious voice next to him again. I left in that place. Luffy gasped as the pressure lifted and in place, something snapped down on his neck and shoulders. He no longer heard that mysterious voice and could feel the presence of the citizens gathered at the square. From a distance, he could feel his nakama. And right next to him was someone else. Someone familiar. Where had he felt this Haki signature before? A flashy execution? Ha, this is the first time I've seen an execution. Luffy mumbled as he relaxed in his restraints. Restraints? Why couldn't he move? The person beside him shouted, "You're the one who's being executed." What? Are you kidding me? No, you stop kidding around. Luffy blinked. For some reason, it didn't seem like this guy was being serious. And really, why was this guy so familiar? Well, Luffy supposed he could play along. I'm sorry. Please let me live. As if I'd just let you go, you idiot. Luffy was pretty sure he heard that voice before too. He frowned as he continued to figure out where he felt this presence and heard this voice. Any last words? Luffy still couldn't think of who this person was about to kill him, or pretend to kill maybe. Luffy still couldn't feel any real ill will coming from the guy. In the end, the young pirate settled on saying whatever might be his last words. He took a deep breath and shouted, "I'm the man who will become the Pirate King." Maybe not that, Luffy thought. Well, he still had time. Zoro and Sanji were coming for him. Oh, this guy was about to chop his neck. Maybe he really would die. Zoro, Sanji, Usopp, Nami. Sorry, looks like I'm dead, Luffy grinned cheerfully. He had no regrets if everything ended here. It would simply mean he was too weak. Ah, how dangerous. Hat almost got burned. Good thing it's raining, Luffy laughed, completely unfazed by whatever might have saved him from being killed. The strong Haki coming from the execution stand had also disappeared, and Luffy lost his reference point. At least he could still sense his nakama. In any case, everything was fine now, looks like I survived. How lucky. Luffy strolled away toward Zoro and Sanji's presence while humming cheerfully. Luffy felt some new auras from Zoro's hips. The one that Luffy recognized seemed smug, while the sword with a darker presence felt as though it was grinning maniacally. The last one was quiet like Zoro's old swords. Well, maybe not quiet, but it didn't give off any specific feeling like the other swords. Weird. Surround the town square. Corner all the pirates. Oops, time to run. Luffy grinned widely as he started running off to where he could feel Usopp and Nami's Haki signatures. Zoro stopped and clashed swords with someone standing in front of them. Luffy could tell it was someone good, but that didn't mean they were their ally. Well, Zoro could take care of it. Someone else was in front of them again. Straw Hat Luffy. Who are you? The name's Smoker. I'm a captain from Marine HQ, and I won't allow you to set sail from here. Eh? Luffy's Haki saw the guy's form change, similar to how Big Brother Kuri did when he became Machi, and then felt himself get caught in something that felt like a cloud. Sanji tried to attack him, but nothing happened. Luffy frowned and sent a rubber punch, only for it to go through the guy again. Luffy tripped, and the cloud guy landed on top of him, pushing his face to the ground. Oof. Looks like your luck has come to an end. Luffy sighed and didn't bother struggling. Someone else was here, and this guy would help him escape. Luffy didn't recognize the new person, but he kind of felt like Gramps. Gramps but with more freedom? Luffy liked how this guy felt. A strong wind pushed everyone away, and Luffy held onto his hat tightly. Zoro was running towards him again, so Luffy just remained still to let the swordsman grab him while heading towards the ship. Luffy was still thinking about this mysterious man. He wanted to ask who the guy was and remember how the man felt so he could thank him one day. Hurry up. We need to set sail immediately, Nami shouted. Apparently the storm was really bad. Luffy sighed. He would think about the mysterious man later. Right now, he needed to get his crew away from Loguetown to head towards the Grand Line. Something about Straw Hat Luffy bothered Smoker. He didn't know what it was, but he needed to find out. It had to have something to do with the sunglasses the pirate wore. And that stupid grin he had right before he was nearly executed. It was the weird way Straw Hat somehow knew that things would work in a certain way. Smoker thought that he had it figured out the moment he pinned the pirate under his jute, but he only became more confused when the most wanted man in the world distracted him. Cloak billowing in the rain, Dragon the Revolutionary stood above him with a maniacal grin. The Marine captain wondered what the Revolutionary was doing in Loguetown. With the threat of the Revolutionary before him, Smoker backed away and was forced to let Straw Hat leave the town. It was a failure the Marine refused to accept, so he returned to base and told his subordinates that they would be leaving for the Grand Line. Smoker knew that the Grand Line was known as the Pirates' Graveyard and that Straw Hat's crew might not survive, but his guts told him otherwise. Straw Hat would surely bring up a storm, and Smoker was determined to be the one to catch him. Crocus had experienced many things on the Grand Line. He traveled with Gold Roger after all. Roger was a crazy man with a crazy dream. The man had a death wish, but he still fulfilled his dreams of reaching the end of the Grand Line. Those years he spent with Roger were likely the most exciting time of his life. Crocus had enough of all the excitement and adventures pirates had. He was satisfied with his place on Twin Cape, taking care of Laboon. Part of it was guilt for leaving Laboon alone for a few years when he traveled with Roger, but Roger was an inspiration and Crocus didn't have the will to refuse the charismatic man. In any case, much like in his earlier days before he met Roger, Crocus simply greeted the new, aspiring rookie pirates who happened to stop by his lighthouse. The only change was taking care of Laboon, who now spent most of his time bashing his head against the red line. Laboon started this when he returned from his journey with Roger. Crocus sometimes wondered if it was his fault that Laboon started hurting himself in hopes of meeting his lost friends. It was that straw hat. Crocus recognized that straw hat. Roger once wore that straw hat. Shanks was given that straw hat. Rayleigh called him a decade ago and said Shanks had given away that straw hat. Crocus was told that a boy in East Blue now owned that straw hat. It was that straw hat. Crocus blinked and stretched his observation haki to measure these teenage pirates. The Straw Hat Pirates. Crocus couldn't help but laugh because that hat, which was once the trademark of Roger, was now recognized as the symbol of an entirely different pirate crew a little more than 20 years later. Crocus shuddered as he felt someone else's haki gently meet his own. That wasn't something he felt often at the beginning of the Grand Line. Few people in Paradise used haki. Even fewer people from the Blues had knowledge of haki, much less used it. This certainly wasn't what he expected when he woke today. Crocus shifted his line of sight and stared at where the other haki was coming from. The boy with that straw hat watched him through his sunglasses. Well, maybe not watch, because Crocus couldn't feel eyes staring at him like he would when other people watched him. Curious. How curious. Monkey D. Luffy was his name. The boy was young, barely 17, and could use observation haki without actively focusing. Crocus wanted to ask Luffy more about his situation. But at the same time, Crocus had sworn he was finished being a doctor for humans after failing to save Roger. That wasn't even his fault because Roger had a death wish, but Crocus knew if he was given just another year, he could have developed a cure for Roger's disease with the help of a few other skilled doctors. In the end, Crocus merely watched as the Straw Hat Pirates befriended Laboon and left Twin Cape for the islands of the Grand Line. It was okay. Crocus didn't need his curiosity satiated. He had enough adventures with the Roger Pirates after all. Nami was growing weaker and weaker. Her presence was losing its shine. Luffy didn't like that. He didn't like it at all, but he had to keep his crew's morale up. They couldn't panic or everything would be all for naught. He just needed to be a little stupid. Luffy panicked anyway, but it was fine because they had Vivi. Luffy was grateful Vivi was here. She knew what to do. Luffy was glad there was at least one person who knew where to go while Nami was too weak to move. Luffy's observation haki paid attention to his crew members' untouched haki at all times. Zoro was calm and confident, even when he was in the process of healing. Zoro was loyal and devoted to the people he respected, his swords, and his dreams. He was a deep blue. Not quite like the ocean nor the sky. Or at least, not like the ocean and sky in Luffy's memories. It was like the blue on the blueberry pies Makino used to make. Well, that's only if Luffy remembered the colors correctly. Luffy couldn't be certain, so he deemed this blue to be Zoro's blue. Usopp's haki was always full of yellow and cowardice. It wasn't pleasant, honestly, but his haki always had the call of the sea. Of all the people Luffy met since setting sail, Usopp was the most similar to his own. A haki presence touched by the sea. A pirate's haki. Yellow like the sun and blue like the sea. Usopp's haki color seemed as though they clashed and constantly fought one another, but when Luffy watched Usopp's color carefully, they were always at a delicate balance. It meant that Usopp, while still growing and learning about the world, knew what he wanted, to some extent. Sanji. Sanji was like Ace. Filled with purple. Luffy recognized it as selflessness. Even though they didn't recognize it, Luffy saw it in them. He had felt it when they were still at Baratai. Sanji was willing to sacrifice his own dreams for his debt to the old man. Luffy couldn't understand that self-sacrificial nature even though he had experienced a similar debt. Regardless, Luffy had felt Sanji's desire to chase after the dream everyone called hopeless. Luffy wanted to help bring out more of that deep mix of red and orange. Luffy wanted to feel more of Sanji's desires and ambitions. Bringing him away from Baratai was the first step, and Luffy could already feel Sanji's colors changing. Finally, there was Nami. Luffy knew Nami had troubles the moment they met. And it was more than just dealing with Buggy troubles. Nami was fully capable of taking care of herself, but Luffy could tell she was lonely. She was strong and independent, but Luffy knew she wanted someone she could rely on. So Luffy was here to help her, as long as she was willing to ask. As long as she stayed on his crew, Luffy would support her, and he was certain all of his other nakama were willing to help Nami. Luffy hoped she would recognize it one day. And perhaps it was this day while she was sick and helpless. Luffy smiled as he laid on the ground beside Usopp and Zoro. They had piled in the room where Nami was sleeping in the bed, all to keep her company. Sanji kept watch outside because he was too worried to sleep comfortably. Luffy felt Nami move in his observation and sensed as her sickly aura turned into a soft yellow of happiness. There was also a minute blue of peace. Good. Luffy smiled. Nami was starting to realize she could trust her safety to his crew. Luffy knew it probably wasn't the best for him to bring Nami up the mountains, but he was their captain and thus responsible for their health. Zoro could have gone, but he didn't really trust Vivi enough to stay on Mary alone, which made sense because the last time he wasn't on Mary, Nami had taken her and left to save her home. Luffy trusted Vivi enough, but Luffy respected his first mate's decision. Luffy held Nami close to his back. He had to because her presence was weak. Luffy's Haki was able to sense many things, but it would be difficult for him to sense someone who was approaching death if they weren't close by. He tried not to think about that though. He had always been one to push forward and go straight towards his goal. This was no different. Luffy simply had to bring Nami up the mountain with Sanji leading the way. Luffy hoped his Haki would stay strong enough for the trek up the snowy mountains. He needed to protect Nami. Keep her safe. He had no choice in this. After all, Nami was Nakama, and as captain, as a pirate, Luffy was responsible for making sure she could reach someone who might be able to save her. Luffy dodged the attacks the stupid people who had attacked his ship, and now him, with ease. Observation Haki helped him avoid everything, but Luffy had to push down his instinct which told him to fight back. Not now. Not now. He couldn't fight them now. Not with Nami on his back, and definitely not with Sanji in his arms. The auras resembling what the townspeople called something rabbits were back. Luffy readied himself to run away further, to protect his Nakama, but his Haki showed those white rabbit auras smacking down the dark stupid people. It was fine. Everything was fine. Thanks for helping. Luffy shouted as he continued toward the mountain where he could feel two presences at the top. He would get there. Soon. He had to get there fast. Nami was getting weaker. Sanji was getting colder. Luffy needed to get there now. Luffy finally reached the top. After the close call of dropping Sanji, Luffy had finally arrived at the top of the mountain. He panted as he felt two kind auras approach, both were a light green. It was the color he often saw on Makino after he finally unlocked color observation Haki. The cold was getting to Luffy, and his Haki was starting to get spotty. He knew they were lucky because the larger figure barely managed to grab them when they fell at the edge of the cliff. Still, Luffy needed to make sure they saved Nami and Sanji. Luffy could barely feel anything, but he turned in the direction of the two fuzzy presences. Save them, he panted out weakly. They're my, Luffy needed to say this before the cold took over his consciousness, they're my friends. Chopper heard the raven-haired boy wearing sunglasses who was practically frozen to death, begging them to heal his friends. Chopper had never met someone like that before. This was someone at death's door begging them to save his friends. Why? Chopper wondered if he could ask the boy why he was so determined to save his friends. Why did he prioritize their health over his when he was clearly dying from the cold? Even though Chopper was curious, he knew he wouldn't be able to ask. After all, they would just regard him as a monster and not answer his questions. Chopper was going through the regular procedure of thawing a patient suffering from frostbite. Doctorine had taught him that early on in his medical career. As a reindeer, Chopper needed to learn and understand how to heal a human by watching and practicing on actual people. He needed to understand that a human's health and reaction to the weather greatly differed from his own. Drum Island was a winter island, so it was only natural that some of Chopper's first patients were people suffering from frostbite. In any case, Chopper took care of the black-haired boy, putting aside his sunglasses. Chopper didn't know why he wore sunglasses, especially considering the snow outside, but the little reindeer figured it was probably just another human quirk. Well, he thought that way until he looked at the teen's eyes. Chopper hadn't seen it in person before, but he remembered reading in a book how some people who lost their sight would end up with a silver-white eye color. This seemed to be the case. Chopper would have to ask Doctorine when she was finished with the female patient. Chopper wasn't sure how to react. The blonde teen who was injured stared at him in interest. It reminded him of the wolves who followed their prey. The wolves who once tried to eat him before he met Dr. Hiraluk. The other one, the younger one with a rounder face, merely blinked with his sightless eyes. He asked for his sunglasses which Chopper pointed towards, only to realize his mistake because the man was blind. He opened his mouth to say it was on the nightstand to his right, but before he could speak, the blind man reached for the approximate area he had pointed at and eventually managed to grab the sunglasses. "Thanks," he said with a grin as he placed the shades over his eyes. Chopper realized it was likely to protect his eyes from the sun. It was a good practice for the blind man to have. I got this from my big brother. He'd get really mad if I lost it, shishishi. Anyway, I'm Luffy. Who are you? His neck stretched towards him, and Chopper was starting to question his diagnosis of whether or not this black-haired boy, Luffy, was blind. Chopper stared for a moment while he remained hidden behind the door. Then he screamed and ran away because there was no way a human could possibly stretch his neck so far. It didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. Now the two male patients were chasing after him, especially after the blonde one told the stretchy one that he was a reindeer. Now both men had eyes glowing as if they were chasing their prey. Scary, Chopper shuddered as he ran as fast as he could with his little legs. Chopper gasped when he saw the two male patients head towards the door. They were going to close it. He couldn't let them do that, st. Ah. Wait, Sanji. The one with the straw hat spoke. Up there. Chopper blinked. The blonde, Sanji, glanced up and opened his mouth in realization, a snowbird nest. The reindeer bit his lips and peered over the edge of the stairs. Sanji, you said that guy we're chasing was a reindeer, right? Yup. Didn't he talk to us? That's right. He also stands on two legs. Monster. Chopper continued to hide and walked away. Of course they'd say that. Chopper blinked as he watched Luffy punch Wapol in the face. The reindeer wasn't sure what was going on except for the fact that the guy was kind of clueless about the temperature. And he was a little slow. Also, his body stretched again. How? Chopper glanced at Sanji and decided to muster up the courage to ask, "Can I ask you something?" Huh? That guy can stretch his body, right? That's right, he's a rubber man. He's blind too. That was a fact Chopper knew, but he still couldn't understand how the raven-haired boy could move around with so much ease. Yep, but sometimes it feels like he can see better than us. What do you mean? The blonde grinned while he bit down on his cigarette. It means he's a monster. There was no malice in his expression. He said it as if he was simply stating a fact. Wapol shot at it. Wapol shot at Doctor's flag. Chopper pushed down the tears and grabbed Wapol. If it was this, Chopper could convince himself to become a monster. Why did you do that to Doctor's pirate flag? Don't hate humans, Chopper. This country is sick. Why? Chopper hesitated as he readied his fist to punch the tyrant before him. He's not worthy enough for your help. Still, Chopper remembered Doctor's teachings, and instead of bringing down his fist, he shouted, "I will not hurt you. So get out of this country." Chopper knew it was stupid, but he couldn't bring himself to hurt the person in front of him. He couldn't resolve himself to punch the man shooting at the flag that held so much significance to Doctor. His naivety resulted in him getting shot by the tyrant, and Chopper could only lay on the ground while tearing up. Hey, you babbling mouth. Chopper blinked as he stared at the blind man who had somehow climbed to the top of the castle. He held Doctor's flag with honor despite not knowing what it looked like. You're just a bunch of frauds. You became pirates without preparing to risk your lives. You will never understand the meaning behind this flag. Chopper stared in awe at Luffy who stood tall at the top of the castle. Except Wapol was using the cannon again, and the man refused to move. I won't let you destroy this flag. This pirate flag, the bomb landed directly on him, is a symbol of faith. The reindeer watched as the smoke cleared and saw the man still standing proudly while holding Doctor's flag. This flag will never be broken. This is a real pirate. Pirates. There are many pirates out there. One day, you'll have to find a chance to go out. He's so great. Reindeer man. Whatcha gonna do now? The pirate grinned cheerily, as if he hadn't just gotten burned by a cannonball. Chopper opened his mouth in wonder and finally resolved himself to truly fight. Not to attack, but to protect what he held dear to his heart. Why did you do that to Doctor's pirate flag? Luffy turned his head to the reindeer's voice. The reindeer, short and small, was a bundle of anger and sadness. Luffy couldn't see it, so he turned to Sanji. Hey, is there a pirate flag up there? Luffy knew the chef didn't understand why he asked, but that was okay. Sanji would eventually learn the importance of the flag. Well, yeah, there's a pirate flag at the very top of the castle. That was all Luffy needed to hear before shooting himself to the top of the castle. He took a deep breath and shouted at the annoying dark blob that had shot at this flag. Hey, you babbling mouth. Luffy felt their attention on him. All of them watched on in confusion. You're just a bunch of frauds. You became pirates without preparing to risk your lives. You will never understand the meaning behind this flag. They shot something at him. Likely a cannon based on its speed. I won't let you destroy this flag. This pirate flag? The bomb hit him directly, but Luffy continued to stand while holding the pirate flag that was clearly precious to the reindeer. That is a symbol of faith. Usopp and Zoro came up. Luffy grinned as he felt his Nakama's Haki signature get closer. They were coming with a few other people. Shishishishi, Luffy launched himself over to both Zoro and Usopp and landed in the snow while laughing. Listen up. We've got a new crew member. He's a reindeer. Luffy heard the shouts calling his new friend a weird creature, and then Usopp shouted, Monster? Luffy gaped as he felt the reindeer's hurt who ran away. The captain bonked Usopp's head, idiot. He's our new crewmate. You made him run away. Luffy started to chase after his new friend, wait for me. Luffy sat next to the reindeer on the castle wall. The reindeer had gotten tired, so Luffy wrapped his arms around his new fluffy friend. He grinned, come be a pirate with me. That's impossible. Sadness seeped from the small animal, but Luffy knew the little one wanted to go on an adventure. Luffy frowned as he actively used future sight to hear the reindeer's words. I'm a reindeer. I have hooves and horns. I also have a blue nose. I'm not human. I'm a monster. I can't be friends with humans. So, thank you for asking me, but I'm going to stay here. I'm a dash. Luffy frowned and interrupted the reindeer, who cares that you're a monster? Just come with us. Luffy pulled the reindeer closer while patting his head. You're our friend. My name is Tony Chopper, the reindeer sniffled. The pirate captain laughed while hugging the crying reindeer in comfort. You'll never be alone again, Chopper. I'm Monkey D. Luffy, and I'm gonna be the pirate king. Doctorine. Kureha sighed. She knew this would one day happen. Chopper was leaving to pursue the adventure that Quack Doctor told him about. A pirate, she sighed as she threw her alcohol bottle at the young reindeer. Following a man with a fool's dream. Chopper babbled on about his resolve to finally leave and become a pirate, while Kureha spoke venomously about the harsh life that would come. She knew the little reindeer could take it. After all, he finally had other people who could care for him. Still, Kureha didn't want him to leave. After all, while Chopper was her only assistant, he was like a son to her. A son she never wanted, but one she was fond of nonetheless. Kureha started throwing knives at the only living being she was fond of, intentionally missing but still close enough to scare someone. Chopper continued to run, even transforming to get away faster. He took their sled, the one she had placed his little medical pack in, and told those kidnapping sweet-talking pirates to hop aboard. That they were leaving the mountain that instant. Heh, Kureha laughed to herself as tears welled up in her eyes. It was time to show off that old quack's research. Kureha sat back on the castle stair steps as she watched the snow turn pink. It was a shame Chopper's captain couldn't see this sight, but she knew the kid's observation Haki would be able to feel and understand the awe everyone else felt. She sighed to herself and couldn't help but feel worry for that stupid son of hers. It was like that flower boy from long ago who tried to cure a dying captain. Except this time, it was an old wound that had no hope in being saved. Kureha wasn't sure what was worse to a doctor. Being unable to heal an old wound or finding the cure to a disease after it killed the man they tried to save. Well, truthfully, the disease didn't kill the man, but Kureha knew that fool of a doctor on Twin Capes gave up on his medical career because of that one so-called failure. Vivi glanced at Luffy while they left Drum Island. The people of Drum Island bade them farewell by sending off fireworks of pink sakura blossoms. It was gorgeous and nothing like what was usually seen in a winter kingdom like this. Vivi was in awe, but she couldn't help but wonder how Luffy felt about the whole situation. After all, Luffy couldn't see this stunning sight. Vivi wasn't sure how to bring it up to the Straw Hat Captain, so she fidgeted and continued to throw glances at the teenage boy. Luffy approached her with a smile. Nah, Vivi. What's wrong? I dash. The princess had always found it odd that Luffy often knew the right time to approach her, to approach anyone really. After staying on Going Merry for so long, she had long since become aware of Luffy's disability. At first, it was disorienting because she had never met someone who lacked what she considered a basic function of the human body. She wasn't sure if she was supposed to treat Luffy more delicately because of his situation or if she should just go about normally. When she asked the Straw Hat crew, they simply shrugged and said Luffy was Luffy. Vivi bit her lips and sighed. You're unable to see what Dr. Kureha did for Chopper. How no, why dash? Why am I still so happy and willing to party with everyone else? Luffy laughed lightly. Vivi nodded in silence. Because everyone else is happy, Luffy smiled. Vivi. Yes? Beauty is found beyond what the eyes can see. If it makes you happy, then it's beautiful. I dash. I don't need to see it to know it's pretty. I know it's pretty because it made my nakama happy. Vivi stared at the pirate captain, only a year older than her, in subtle awe. She had never thought about it in such a way. She had grown up in the castle and found fun, happiness, while playing in the so-called dirty streets. But here Luffy was telling her that perhaps those dirty streets had never been dirty or ugly or any of those things the nobles of many countries found bad. Perhaps those dirty streets held a beauty only she and her friends could understand. I see, Vivi smiled brightly. Thank you. Shishishi, Luffy cheerfully laughed and pulled at her hand. Let's go. We need to party. Luffy whistled calmly as he sat next to Usopp while fishing for food. He heard Nami and Vivi talking about going through some steam. It did feel a little warmer now, but other than that, Luffy didn't really feel much different. At some point, Luffy felt a Haki signature at the end of his fishing line, so he started reeling in only for Usopp to shout in shock, causing the person at the end of the fishing line to fall into the water. Luffy tilted his head in thought while waiting for someone to get the stranger back on board. Luffy knelt beside the stranger who everyone was calling an Okama. Luffy wasn't sure what that meant, but he supposed this person with a pinkish and a little bit of fuchsia color was this so-called Okama. Either way, the young pirate supposed this guy was pretty cool. He seemed a little desperate though. As if he was looking for something. Or maybe someone? Well, no matter, Luffy wouldn't pry. After all, it was none of his business. More importantly, this guy had a devil fruit. Hey, what's your power? Luffy asked excitedly. It was probably really cool like his own rubber powers. Allow me to put on a show, the newcomer's voice responded cheerfully. Luffy's Haki warned him of the incoming hand to his face, but he remained still because he knew he wouldn't get hurt. He allowed his head to swing back and then bounce back into place. Luffy tilted his head in confusion. What's going on? The young captain didn't feel any change from his Haki, but he could hear his voice's panicked scream. But it wasn't coming from him. Well, at least Luffy thought it wasn't from him. Why can't I see anything? Oh, it was from the new guy. A few seconds passed, and the stranger was on his knees, panting in confusion. Are you blind? Luffy nodded. Yup. Oh, you poor thing. Shishishi, it's okay. I've been like this forever, Luffy grinned. He still wasn't sure what this guy's devil fruit was, but it was okay. This person was fun. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Bon Clay, and I ate the main know me. If I touch someone's face with my right hand, I can imitate anyone. Whoa, Luffy widened his mouth in amazement. It was a little disappointing he couldn't see it, but hearing Bon Clay's voice change while he spoke was really cool. Unfortunately, that's all I can show Dash. That's so cool. Chopper cheered. Do more. Usopp clapped. Off course. Bon Clay twirled a bit and started changing voices again. Every face I've ever touched. I never forget a single one. Luffy applauded while laughing gleefully, only to pout when he sensed another ship in the distance. It seemed their time with their new friend would be cut short. Well, it was fine. After all, as Bonchan was about to say, length of time means nothing to true friendship. Bon Clay hopped back to his own ship, while Luffy, Usopp, and Chopper shouted, "We'll meet again." Bon Clay waved as he twirled at the edge of his ship. "Let's go, lovelies." "Yes, sir. Mr. 2 Bon Clay-sama, sir." Ace wiped his mouth while grinning at the restaurant owner. He held Luffy's poster proudly. "Hey, uncle. Has this guy come by recently? Kinda short, wears a straw hat and sunglasses. Probably looks like he's on vacation somewhere." Ace really hoped Luffy got his message at Drum Island. Or, knowing Luffy, hopefully he didn't get lost, got a good navigator, and headed for Alabasta. It would be great to see Luffy again. Ace grinned to himself while using a toothpick to remove bits of food stuck between his teeth. He was willing to bet Luffy's observation Haki had gotten even better after 3 years. Ace took another chug of the beer the store owner provided and turned around as he felt a single person approaching while the crowds of other people backed away. It seemed this man was a Marine officer. One confident in his ability too. Now, what is the Whitebeard pirate's second commander doing in this country? Fire Fist Ace. "I'm just searching," Ace smirked as he tilted his hat back to make eye contact with the Marine, "for my little brother." Ace stood up after being catapulted through multiple buildings. "Ugh," he sighed as he bowed to a family in the middle of lunch. "Apologies for disrupting your meal." While pushing his hat down, he stretched his Haki back towards the restaurant and was surprised to find a familiar aura. Luffy. He continued to walk over only to be shoved down by the Marine officer from earlier. Smoker? Ace was pretty sure that was what the other people at the bar mentioned. He'd haze. Ace stopped the Marine's attack against Luffy with ease and harumphed in annoyance. How dare he try to attack Luffy? Didn't he know Luffy couldn't see him? Well, no matter, Ace grinned smugly as he glanced back to his little brother. As always, a fond feeling reserved only for Luffy bubbled up. Luffy laughed openly. "Ace. You're happier now. You haven't changed a bit, Luffy." Ace paused, feeling a sense of déjà vu. It reminded him of Big Brother Kuri, and he raised an eyebrow. Future sight? Luffy didn't have that 3 years ago when he had left Dawn Island. "Yep. I'll see you later." Fine, whatever," the freckled man scoffed as he returned his attention to Smoker. "Well, Smokey. Let's get this over with. Ace placed a wall of fire between himself and the Marines, effectively blocking their path. He laughed loudly as he ran off to where he could feel Luffy's Haki signature. It seemed his little brother was having a lot of fun while talking with his nakama. After bringing and tying Striker to Luffy's ship, Ace jumped up to take the spot on the railing Luffy was sitting on. Except, Luffy turned around to give a big hug, causing the two of them to fall into the ocean. Ace instinctively held onto Luffy's limp body while his own became weak in the water. So much for a good first impression. Ace coughed out the water that had entered his lungs during his time in the ocean. Thank you very much, he bowed to the green-haired swordsman who had fished both him and his brother out of the water. Then he turned to the rest of Luffy's nakama and thanked them. Hello, everyone. Thanks for taking care of my little brother. No problem, they returned the bow. Ace sighed and put Luffy into a chokehold, a special one meant for the rubber man. You idiot. Making both of us fall into the water. You already saw my devil fruit power, so I can't save you from drowning anymore. Shishishi, I forgot. Luffy grinned and wiggled out of Ace's arms. It seemed he found a way to get out of that chokehold, Ace mused. I'll need to find another way to keep him in place. So Ace, what are you doing here? I'm just here on a mission, Ace shrugged while thinking bitterly about the betrayal he and the Whitebeards experienced. Thankfully, he had gotten to Thatch in time, so the chef survived. Ace refused to think about what would have happened if he didn't constantly keep his Haki active. Anyway, he continued before Luffy could ask about the situation. Luffy, do you dash? No way. Want to join the Whitebeard pirates? Ace laughed, fully expecting the answer. Still, he gave a light hit to the rubber man's head. Don't do that. Let me finish what I'm saying, idiot. But Big Brother Curry does it. Luffy pouted. Whatever, so, not gonna join? Your nakama can join too, of course. Nope. Ace smiled, figured as much. I'm gonna make him Pirate King though. Meh, Luffy merely shrugged, I'll just fight him. But Ace, how long are you gonna stay? Ace pursed his lips and thought for a few seconds. On one hand, he had to chase down the traitor. On the other, he could spend more time with Luffy and learn more about his nakama. And more importantly, Ace could see just how much Luffy had improved his observation Haki and evaluate whether or not he was ready for the rest of the Grand Line. Smoker chewed on his cigars in frustration after letting Straw Hat get away again. First, Dragon the Revolutionary, and now, Whitebeard's second commander, Fire Fist Ace. It was odd, out of place, unnatural for not one but two New World veterans to go out of their way to, dare he say, protect a single rookie in East Blue. Smoker had yet to figure out why Dragon helped Straw Hat. Perhaps it was one of his random whims? Dragon didn't seem like someone who would be impulsive considering how covert he worked as a revolutionary, but it was still possible. After all, Smoker wasn't familiar with how the revolutionary worked. Fire Fist Ace, on the other hand, specifically mentioned something about a brother. Was Straw Hat a member of the Whitebeard crew? After all, Whitebeard himself considered his crew his sons. Then what was Straw Hat doing in East Blue? Perhaps Fire Fist and Straw Hat grew up together? They looked similar enough, and they were both from East Blue. Still, that didn't explain the odd feeling he always felt regarding Straw Hat. Smoker didn't care about Straw Hat's relationships. His gut told him that Straw Hat was hiding something about himself. He had a secret of some sort that had nothing to do with his family or whatever other relationships he might have. And even if it was a secret regarding his family, Smoker wasn't one to persecute someone for being related to a criminal. Smoker let out a huff and cleared his thoughts. That wasn't important for now. What they needed to do was figure out what the Straw Hats were doing in Alabasta. And more importantly, he glanced at Tashigi. There was a Vivi on the Straw Hat crew. Vivi? As in Nefertari Vivi, the princess of Alabasta? Tashigi exclaimed. Why would she be with them? Right, he sighed, it might have something to do with the one man I despise in this country. One of the 7 warlords. Yeah, but isn't he technically our ally? Listen up, Tashigi. Smoker glanced at the sergeant and grunted, once a pirate, always a pirate. Ace carted his hand through Luffy's hair as he slept peacefully under the desert sky. Of course, Ace was well aware Luffy's Haki was still present. After all, it was a habit Luffy had picked up over the years. One that Ace also practiced. His little brother always wanted to know that there was someone around him after all. Every now and then, Ace felt a little guilty for leaving Luffy alone for 3 years on Dawn Island, but he also knew Luffy wouldn't forgive him if he broke the promise they made in honor of Sabo. Ace's own Haki felt his little brother's nakama shift around. It was the clever, orange-haired navigator, Nami. He smiled. Sorry, did I wake you? Nami shook her head. No, it's too cold for me to sleep. Not like Luffy, huh? Ace laughed lightly. He can fall asleep anywhere. Nami scoffed. I know. He fell asleep while fighting some pirates trying to invade Usopp's home. Sounds like him, the idiot. Ace turned his fond gaze to his younger brother. Luffy was a grown, independent man, and a captain in his own right. Ace couldn't always take care of him, but he'd still worry. Based on what Ace had seen so far, Luffy's nakama were all good people. Luffy had always been a good judge of people's character after all. Seeing these rookie pirates made Ace smile, and he recalled the manner lessons from Makino. Ace wanted to give a full bow while thanking the navigator, but Luffy was still sleeping peacefully in his lap. Instead, the older pirate simply lowered his head politely to Nami. "Thank you for taking care of him." Nami blinked. Honestly, Luffy's brother has been nothing but polite ever since they met, but she really wanted to know why he went off to become a pirate when Luffy was blind. It was obvious that Ace knew, with the way he treated Luffy, so it just seemed wrong for him to simply abandon a boy who was blind. Not only that, but Ace clearly supported Luffy's dreams to become the Pirate King. "Why did you leave Luffy to become a pirate?" "We always wanted to be pirates," Ace smiled earnestly. "We wanted to be pirates even before the incidents that caused Luffy to become blind." Guilt filled Ace's heart when he thought back to how it all happened. Luffy suffered the consequences of Ace's choice back then. Abandoning him to Porchimi. Not being strong enough to bring back Sabo. Stubbornly staying to fight against a pirate in the midst of a fire. Not being smart enough to recognize that his little brother was losing his sight. Nami stared at Luffy's brother curiously. She recognized that he was organizing his thoughts, memories, so she waited patiently for the older pirate to respond to her question. She could see subtle guilt in his eyes as well as gentle fondness for Luffy. She had a feeling that perhaps Ace was also saved by Luffy at some point. Just like how Luffy saved herself. Ace continued while gently carting his hand through Luffy's hair. Luffy was 7? Probably? It was around 10 years ago when he lost his sight because of a pirate who beat him up with spiked gloves. Wadash. "I didn't save him in time," Ace said with regret laced in his tone. "I didn't intend on saving him back then." He let out a soft breath and continued. He later sustained some internal injuries because of a fire a pirate from the same crew started. They started it in the trash heap we grew up around. "A pirate?" "Yep," Ace murmured. "A pirate. And you two still wanted to be pirates?" "Well, Luffy swore he would become Pirate King before then, and we both have certain circumstances that wouldn't let us become upstanding Marines," Ace shrugged. "Why?" "A promise," he paused and recalled the words spoken on a cliff, "to live without regrets." Ace felt Nami's confused gaze, so he added, "Gramps also found another pirate to teach us how to use Haki. It's how Luffy sees. Not all pirates are bad." "He said that too. Not all pirates are bad." Nami rolled her eyes as she recalled his words. She also thought back to the talk she had with Luffy after he fought Kuro. "He told me about that. His mystery power." Ace snorted. "He's still calling it that?" "Yeah," the navigator laughed lightly then tilted her head in interest. "So you have it too?" "Yep," the freckled pirate hummed. "I'm not as good at it like Luffy. He's got a lot of the advanced techniques covered, but I'm pretty sure I have a wider range than Luffy. I needed that range to find him because he got lost a whole lot back home. Having a wide range helped with keeping track of everyone on Moby Dick, too. Could you teach us that? Luffy still gets lost everywhere." Nami's eyes sparked in excitement. This power, Haki? Seemed really useful. Ace paused for a moment, considering how much Luffy's nakama would benefit from learning Haki. There were really only positive consequences for them learning, but Ace couldn't just hang out with Luffy forever. He was on a mission after all. "There won't be enough time for me to help all of you unlock it, but I can give a basic explanation. Luffy isn't the best teacher, but you can ask him for the training process." Ace was proud of Luffy. He had grown so much over the years he was gone. His little brother was no longer that bumbling, clumsy mess from 10 years ago. He'd grown fully capable of himself and understood the value of his nakama. Luffy had always known it and placed importance on nakama and family. Still, seeing it here, in front of the princess of this desert kingdom, Ace honestly couldn't have been more proud. It was about time he left, so after speaking to Luffy a little bit and handing over his Viva card, he announced, "I should get going to finish up my mission." "What?" Ace chuckled. They were probably hoping he'd help, but he couldn't do that. This was Luffy's fight, and Ace couldn't recklessly bring in Pop's name into the situation. Anyway, he bowed to the Straw Hats. "Having a dumb little brother makes an older brother worry. He probably gives you a lot of trouble, but take care of him for me." "A sandstorm!" Vivi shouted in worry. "Yuba is being attacked by a sandstorm." Luffy frowned. He felt a presence from that sandstorm. Like Ace and Smokey. Some sort of devil fruit. He was certain Ace could feel it too considering his Haki suddenly tensed. "Impossible," the princess' voice was drained and filled with desperation. The oasis is being swallowed by the sand. Luffy spread his haki further and tried to find where that devil fruit presence came from, but only found a single person at the very edge. The captain spoke up while patting Vivi's shoulder. Is this Yuba? Yes. There's only one person in this town. Ace hummed in agreement, and the sandstorm isn't natural. Luffy pursed his lips and took a deep breath so that the stranger in the distance could hear them. Where's the water? He coughed after he accidentally swallowed a handful of sand. Bleh, he spat out the sand and figured that might not have been the best idea. Still, it was worth it because the person from the town noticed them. I will stop the rebellion. Luffy knit his brows while listening to Vivi. In the end, he laid on the sand and refused to move. I quit. What? Ace. Please say something to him. Luffy knew Ace wouldn't say anything. Ace had been questioning Vivi's naivety since he learned about what she wanted to do. His nakama on the other hand. Come on. Let's go for Vivi-chan. Boring. He ignored Sanji's anger and focused his haki onto the princess. Vivi. I want to beat up Crocodile. If we stop the rebellion, will it stop? Crocodile? We're pirates. We can't do anything even if we go to this other place with you. Luffy felt her hesitation. Vivi, you just don't want anyone to die. Of course I don't. You're fighting a pirate. One of the warlords. Luffy scowled. He could tell Vivi was willing to sacrifice her own life, but what about the people who cared for her? You're being naive. The captain rolled away before she even moved to slap him and continued without letting her speak aloud. Why are you risking your life? What else am I supposed to do? Vivi shouted while throwing a punch. Luffy grabbed her hand in his palm. You think one life will be enough? There's no dash. Nothing else? You have us. We're nakama, so why don't you risk our lives too? Luffy released her hand and sat down again. Look. You're crying. You're the one who wants to kill him the most. He grabbed his hat and demanded, tell me where Crocodile is. Luffy felt Ace lean against his back while he waited for his nakama to come to a decision. He pouted despite feeling the pride in Ace's presence. You've grown, Luffy, Ace said fondly. Of course. You've got good nakama too. I'm proud of you, lil bro. Luffy bit his lips. I think you've got this covered, so I'll be taking my leave now. Gotta hunt down a traitor. The captain nodded. See you later? Yep. And keep this safe. Ace patted Luffy's head and then placed a piece of paper into his hand. Luffy carefully closed his fist around the paper. Now that his brother had moved away, Luffy could tell the card had a similar presence to Ace. He felt it more carefully and could tell it wasn't even half the size of his palm. He tilted his head in curiosity. It's just a piece of paper. Yep. That paper will let us meet again, Ace responded. Don dash. It's mine. Luffy closed his fist around the paper and moved his hand away. Ace laughed. Good. Smoker sat at the back of the cage while Straw Hat argued with Crocodile. He'd always known Crocodile wasn't someone to be trusted, but it still didn't feel good when he saw it for himself. He didn't like seeing the evidence of the government being wrong. While watching the pirates bicker, Smoker couldn't help but think about Straw Hat's reaction to Crocodile nearly killing Princess Nefertari Vivi. Someone who expressed his anger so openly would never join the warlords for his own benefit. He was someone who would storm through without a care for what people saw him as. Honesty. Integrity. Those weren't words Smoker would use to describe a pirate, but he thought they fit Straw Hat rather well. At any rate, these characteristics made him a better pirate, morally, than Crocodile, who was planning the downfall of an entire kingdom. Smoker could appreciate this, but at the same time, it was irritating because someone like Straw Hat could have made the marine systems better for the citizens. At least, that's what Smoker thought was a possibility based on what he had seen of the pirates' morals. The marine captain sighed quietly, erasing the thoughts of what could have been. He was well aware of what people said was the call of the sea. Smoker could see that Monkey D. Luffy was a person who would only be a pirate and nothing else. He did what he wanted when he wanted to and had no regard for rules and regulations. He would have been a failure to the Marines' organized structure. And that was saying something, as Smoker himself was considered quite the rebel among Marine ranks. Then, he heard a disdainful tone from Crocodile with information Smoker wasn't sure he wanted to learn. Mr. 2 said that you're blind. What are you even doing here? Helping a country you can't even see? What are you, a hero? The warlord sneered in contempt. Blind? I don't want to be a hero. Heroes have to share their meat. The F-dash? Wait, no. Smoker backpedaled in his thoughts. Straw Hat is blind? Learning that information finally cleared the unsettling feeling in his gut. Still, he needed to confirm this knowledge. Smoker turned to Roronoa and directly asked, Straw Hat is FING blind? The swordsman glanced at him. Oh, yeah, Luffy is blind. The orange-haired girl Smoker didn't recognize hit the former bounty hunter on the head. Why'd you tell him that? It's supposed to be a secret? The hell was that for, witch? Roronoa shouted back, rubbing the small bump forming on his head. Luffy isn't trying to hide it or anything. Smoker let out a frustrated breath. So it was true. He couldn't help but wonder how and why this kid went off to become a pirate. He also couldn't help but feel guilty because apparently he'd been chasing a blind teenager. It felt wrong to go after someone with such a blatant disability, but at the same time, he felt torn between treating him normally or letting him be a special exception. Smoker was certain that Straw Hat probably wouldn't want any unnecessary sympathy or pity because he understood that Straw Hat was quite capable. It was why he decided to chase after him after all. The Marine captain shook his head and gnawed on his cigar while taking out another one from his jacket. He needed at least 2, or even 3, to keep his mind clear. He huffed and reminded himself of his own words. Once a pirate, always a pirate. It shouldn't matter whether or not Straw Hat Luffy was a blind teenager. He was old enough to set sail after all. Since he chose to be a pirate, then it was Smoker's responsibility to capture him. The Marine captain sighed and once again resolved himself to capturing Straw Hat. Before that, however, he needed to get out of this place. The third one that just entered the room, Smoker sighed while the pirates tried to figure out which Bananadile had swallowed the key. He wasn't fond of helping pirates, but they were also his only chance at getting out of this demed cage. What? How'd you know? The long-nosed boy exclaimed. Are your ears for decoration? It has the same growl. The pirates looked to their captain who nodded. He's right. It feels like the same croc from earlier. Also has the tastiest meat. Straw Hat drooled as he spoke. Just as Smoker thought he could appreciate Straw Hat's intelligence, after watching him stupidly flounder in knee-deep water, the young pirate decided to think of the Bananadile as lunch. What the F dash? Though he still had to wonder how Straw Hat knew considering the fact that he was blind. Smoker choked and tried to breathe in the fresh air after being brought up from the water. He unsteadily stood up with his jit and pointed it at the pirate hunter, Roronoa. Why did you save me? The green-haired swordsman simply glanced at him indifferently and shrugged. I was following my captain's orders. It's just him being weird, so don't thank me for it. The Marine bit down on his damp cigars and glared. Then, I assume you all won't have any problem if I complete my duties as a Marine here. While he said that, he was thinking about how Crocodile was running around causing havoc in this kingdom. That didn't sit well with him, and legally, Smoker couldn't do anything to stop it. His squad was approaching, so he knew he had to make a decision quickly. Go. I'll let you get away this one time, Smoker sighed and closed his eyes. If I don't see it, it doesn't exist. The next time I see you, you're a dead man. Straw Hat Luffy. He could only do this to help a country on the verge of collapse. By putting his hopes on a pirate. He also wouldn't tell the higher-ups about Straw Hat's circumstances. As repayment for saving his life. Smoker knew this was a dumb decision, but he operated by his own morals. Plus, if he told anyone outside his division, Straw Hat would likely start getting hunted by more people. That wouldn't do. After all, Straw Hat was his prey to chase. Straw Hat merely grinned as if he already knew this would happen. I knew you were a good guy, Smokey. His arm stretched out and patted the Marine captain's head once. Smoker swung his jit in irritation. Go away. He ran his hand through his hair, baffled by the touch which could not be considered an attack. There was something wrong with Straw Hat. And now it wasn't just because he was blind. Crocodile knew he recognized that power, but he didn't know its name. It was something common among the big names in the New World. He had heard rumors of Charlotte Katakuri being able to utilize that power to see into the future. There was another power that allowed people to cut through Logia powers. Thinking of that power made him recall the hand he lost to Whitebeard. Crocodile grimaced at the memory, but fortunately, it seemed Straw Hat didn't have that power. Well, it didn't matter in the end. After all, Straw Hat Luffy was merely a rookie who didn't understand the level of the Grand Line. Furthermore, Straw Hat was a blind child. What harm could he possibly do to his plans? Crocodile couldn't help but laugh as this Luffy declared he would defeat him. Really now? A pirate not even out of his teens who wears a straw hat, sandals, and sunglasses. Did he think being a pirate would be like going on vacation? Please. That child pirate came back and became a water balloon? Is he FING serious? Crocodile spat out a bit of his blood and resolved to destroy this DMN palace. Water Luffy was seriously pissing him off. It was even more annoying how he didn't even warrant a reaction from the child pirate once he absorbed all the moisture in the surrounding land. Then again, Straw Hat was blind, so he probably didn't even know where they were. Whatever, the warlord growled as he grabbed the rubber man by the neck. Unfortunately, Straw Hat managed to land one bubble of water on his face, but the second one missed. Fing hell, Crocodile cursed. He continued to hold onto the young pirate and absorbed all the moisture in him. Once done, he tossed the dying man over the ledge. Good riddance. Again? Crocodile was sick of Straw Hat just appearing randomly. He was now using his blood of all things to fight him. Worse, it was working. The warlord wiped his forehead and took off the cover on his hook. Seeing Straw Hat was starting to PSS him off. Especially those DMN sunglasses, so he purposefully aimed his hook to toss off the sunglasses. Crocodile knew those sunglasses were most likely there to protect his blind eyes, but they still looked ridiculous on a boy wearing a straw hat, shorts, and a vest. There were even sandals to complete the vacation look. Thankfully, the warlord had long since dried up those sandals. The two pirates exchanged several hits before Crocodile could knock off the glasses, revealing the rubber man's closed eyes. You've lost to me 2 times before, and this time you'll die from the poison. You can't even see, so why are you even bothering with this kingdom? You, Straw Hat replied but ignored his question, don't understand anything. Luffy shook himself awake after passing out while chasing after Crocodile. He breathed lightly, feeling refreshed from his little nap, and then stretched his haki to find his opponent again. He searched for a presence that was gritty and grainy. After a few moments, he finally found Crocodile's presence deep underground. Luffy tilted his head in thought, wondering how he should get there. The easiest way would be to simply smash through the ground, but he was certain Vivi wouldn't appreciate that. Luffy sighed. It didn't really matter at this point since all he needed to do was beat up Crocodile. With that issue resolved, Luffy started smashing through the ground to reach wherever Crocodile was standing. Luffy panted as he faced Crocodile for the 3rd time. Destroying the floors had tired him, but he had to stay awake. After all, Vivi was relying on him to defeat Crocodile. While trading blows with the warlord, Luffy felt his sunglasses being thrown to the side. Usually, Luffy would immediately go to grab it, but he needed to focus on his fight with Crocodile, so Luffy closed his eyes. While it didn't make much of a difference with his non-existent sight, he always felt he focused better with his eyes closed. Luffy breathed steadily and replied to Crocodile, "You don't understand anything." He let out a breath through his mouth and stomped forward while stretching his right arm towards Crocodile. It was obvious the other pirate would be able to avoid the attack, so he immediately ducked down and swung his arm to his right side where he felt Crocodile's presence move. Crocodile was still talking about how he'd lose even if he won. Seriously, this guy didn't make sense, so Luffy continued fighting silently as he relied on his haki to predict Crocodile's next position. He felt it and immediately forced his arms to rapidly hit towards the Sandman only to trip over his feet. DMN, Luffy huffed as he tried to push his body up. His body wasn't listening to him, just like when he was losing his sight. Move. Somewhere from outside wherever they were, Luffy could hear Vivi's desperate pleas to save her country. Luffy needed to stop this man here. You cannot defeat me. Crocodile scoffed and mocked his words. Called him pathetic. Asked why he was uselessly struggling. None of that mattered though. Because I, Luffy huffed, will become the Pirate King. Vivi stood beside Kuro as she looked over the ocean shore. She felt a tug at her heart, a longing to go back out to sea, but she remained on the ground and took a deep breath. Finally, Vivi spoke for her people to hear. During my travels, there was a man, a boy, really, only a year older than myself. Vivi smiled as she recalled Luffy's cheerful laughs. His smiles were as bright as the sun, but he brought joy into our lives, much like the rain after a long drought. He smiled like the cruelty of the world hadn't stolen his eyes, Vivi wanted to say, but she didn't want to expose that information. It was something people would have to ask Luffy himself. Vivi recalled the conversation she had with him after leaving Drum Island and continued, he taught me how beauty can be found in many different forms. How it was up to me to decide whether or not something was beautiful. From there, I started to see the beauty of the ocean. Whether it was on peaceful waters or through turbulent storms. I have found value in all my experiences, especially because it led me to a tiny ship. This small ship, a caravel of a sheep, held an even smaller crew, but they still carried on. Even through the darkest of storms, when their navigator was at death's door, or on days as bright as the sun is now, this small ship found its way. They asked, "Can you see the light?" They pushed me forward to reach my goals. They said, "Look, there's the light." And they helped me find my way back home. Vivi bit her lips as she finally saw Going Merry, the small but inspirational ship which carried the strongest people Vivi knew. She took a hold of the speaker again and shouted, "I'm here to say goodbye." Vivi could see Luffy's stunned face, but she knew her captain would understand. "Thank you for everything you've done for me. Even though I still want to go with you, right now, I truly love my country, so I can't leave with you." Vivi felt tears welling up in her eyes. She wanted to go on an adventure with them again, but she was the princess of Alabasta. Her loyalty laid with her country, and she would ensure Alabasta would become a beautiful country that could welcome the Straw Hats proudly once they returned. If there is a day where we meet each other again, will you take me as a friend? Vivi's voice cracked as she asked. Perhaps, one day, her country could prosper without her presence. Vivi saw as Luffy prepared to shout, only to be stopped by Nami. For a moment, Vivi thought it was a denial from the orange-haired navigator, but she immediately understood when they turned around to reveal the X mark on their left arms. Tears fell freely from Vivi's eyes as she lifted her own arm. She saw Kuro doing the same with his wing. She understood this was their way to acknowledge their friendship while protecting her status from the Marines. This was how they could help her with her chosen path. Thank you for everything. Vivi came. Luffy could feel her presence at the coast. Everyone else insisted that she hadn't come because she was giving her speech, but Luffy knew Vivi was here. The duck Kuro was also here. I'm here to say goodbye. Luffy paused and moved his hand to tell his nakama to wait. He already knew what Vivi wanted to say at this point, but he needed to hear and feel her resolve when she actually spoke the words aloud. Thank you for everything you've done for me. Even though I still want to go with you, right now, I truly love my country, so I can't leave with you. Luffy grinned. Hearing things with his own ears was different from future sight. He could also feel her resolve and dedication in her blue presence. Loyalty to her country and a light pink for acceptance. She also exuded a lavender and purple impression. Selflessness but also something more. Perhaps it was her royal blood finally emerging upon the realization that, despite wanting to go on an adventure, she still wished to remain here and complete her responsibilities as the princess of this country. If there is a day where we meet each other again, will you take me as a friend? Vivi's voice was hoarse, and Luffy knew she was probably crying. He wanted to shout in agreement because of course. She was nakama as well after all. Nami stopped him before he could impulsively yell out his reply. They needed to protect Vivi's reputation now. They needed to help her with her chosen path. Instead of shouting and informing the Marines that they were friends with Vivi, the Straw Hats lifted their left arm with the X mark. Luffy laughed joyfully. This mark of friendship was a great idea. Back when they were deciding what to do to prevent Bonchan from tricking them with their faces, Luffy had mentioned that it wouldn't be a problem for him. After all, Bonchan couldn't change his Haki signature. But now, Luffy was happy they decided to go through with the mark, even with himself. After all, now they could silently prove their friendship with Vivi and Kuro. Luffy tilted his head wondering who the presence inside the bathroom belonged to. All of his nakama were here, so was it a stowaway? Luffy shrugged. He didn't detect any ill intent, so he'd let the stranger come up when he or she was ready. The stranger finally came out after they had escaped the Marines. Based on the voice, it was likely a woman. Luffy was pretty sure he had heard this voice before somewhere. Captain, I believe these are yours. Her aura was calm as she placed something familiar into his hands. After feeling around for a little bit, Luffy brightened up. My sunglasses. I forgot. Thanks. Ace would be mad if I lost them. You're welcome, she replied easily. Meanwhile, everyone else shouted, what are you doing here? Miss All Sunday? Luffy opened his mouth, finally remembering who this person was. He remembered that she was pretty nice. She had saved his life a few times too. Please call me Nico Robin, she answered patiently. Your captain needs to take responsibility, so I'd like to join your crew. Luffy furrowed his brows. Take responsibility for what? You saved my life when I wanted to die. I have nowhere else to go, so let me stay on your ship. Honestly, Luffy didn't really remember carrying this woman up after fighting Crocodile. He only recalled two presences who still had something they yearned for, so he brought them above ground. It didn't matter, Luffy smiled. He could tell that she was a good person. Okay, you can stay. He turned to his nakama, don't worry. She's not as bad as you all think. Luffy vaguely recalled their first meeting with her. He knew she had been lying about killing that uncle but had no proof at the time. Then she saved him from drowning in the sand. This person, Robin, was really nice. Just very lonely. She was shrouded in gray, but she always hid it with a layer of yellow. It wasn't a happy yellow, but rather, a yellow similar to Usopp's when he told his lies. Dishonesty and deception. Robin told her life story indifferently, but Luffy could feel her pushing down the pain and sadness she had experienced back then. She didn't dive into the details, but it sounded like she left because she had no other choice. She reminded him of Sabo 10 years ago. Except, Sabo wasn't lucky enough to survive as long as Robin. Luffy hummed as his observation picked up on smaller presences belonging to Robin. He poked at one of them and a hand tickled him back. How fun! Luffy was certain that Robin would fit in perfectly with their crew. He knew she was like Nami and would try to leave eventually, but Luffy would take her back. After all, she was now part of his crew. Robin was now Nakama, and nothing but intentional betrayal could change that. Luffy pouted. He wanted to go underwater to explore that mysterious ship that fell from the sky. Still, he understood Nami's concern. While his observation Haki could reach quite far and pick up on people's emotions, it was still spotty whenever he tried to sense things underwater. He wasn't sure why that was the case, but it was probably because of his devil fruit. Plus, Nami was right when she said he wouldn't be able to find anything useful. Luffy kicked his feet while sitting on Going Merry's rails. He hummed softly and let his Haki follow Zoro and Sanji. Their presences were getting a little faint as they went farther, but Luffy trusted his Nakama to keep them safe. He also trusted the strength of his first mate and chef. They would be fine. Pull back. Luffy shouted. He could feel a large presence approaching them from under the sea. It reminded him of the Sea Kings they had previously encountered, but this was much larger. Luffy heard Nami, Usopp, and Chopper all scream when they noticed the sea monster coming up. The turtle swallowed the ship. If we don't cut the pipes, we'll be pulled underwater as well, Robin observed. Cut the pipes, Luffy replied resolutely. What? They all looked at him in shock. Luffy pointed to the water under Merry. Zoro and Sanji aren't in that ship. They're swimming up right now. Quickly! Cut the pipes! As captain, Luffy needed to ensure their safety, and since he already knew Zoro and Sanji weren't connected to the pipes, the best option was to cut them. After all, he couldn't have his crew getting pulled underwater. Luffy tilted his head as he sensed the panic and fear from both his Nakama and the people on the other ship. He wondered what they were so scared of. There wasn't anything around except for that large turtle. And speaking of that turtle, it was scared of something too. Guys, what's wrong? Monster! They all shouted in reply. Except Robin. She remained quiet, but Luffy could still feel her shock from whatever they were all seeing. The captain frowned, wondering what exactly they saw to warrant such a reaction. He didn't feel anything, but before Luffy could say anything, he fell onto his face from a sudden movement. Apparently, everyone else had already started rowing Merry away from whatever they saw. Today has been a really weird day. Luffy nodded. A galleon fell from the sky. Luffy remembered that happening. The log post keeps pointing up. Luffy remembered Nami complaining about that for a while. A strange monkey appeared to salvage the shipwreck. Luffy wasn't sure what this strange monkey was about, but it was probably the stranger he felt on the ship. A giant sea turtle ate the ship. Luffy agreed. The turtle was several times larger than Merry. The sky went black. Luffy furrowed his brows. That was something he wouldn't be able to sense since everything had been dark to Luffy for a long time. And giant monsters larger than regular giants showed up. And who was this stranger? Well, Zoro and Sanji went to kick this guy, so Luffy went along with that action since it was probably an enemy. After the stranger was gone, Luffy turned to his Nakama. What do you mean the sky went black and there were giant monsters? Robin explained patiently, it was as if it suddenly became nighttime, and we saw large figures in front of us earlier. Luffy frowned, are you sure? I didn't sense anything. It's what we saw. Nami exclaimed. Yeah, Chopper joined. They were huge. Captain San, Robin interrupted. I heard from Mr. 2 that you are blind. Do you perhaps use observation Haki? Yep. Luffy nodded easily. I see. Then perhaps what we saw was an illusion, Robin replied. I remember reading how observation Haki can see through lies and detect the truth. Big Brother Curry said the same thing. Usopp and Chopper sighed in relief. So it wasn't real. Nami hummed, maybe it has something to do with the Sky Island? Perhaps. Still, we don't have any other information for how to get there, Nami grumbled. Robin handed something to Nami. I managed to steal an eternal log post from that monkey's ship. Luffy didn't like this place. Most of the people here were red aggressive and green greedy. It wasn't a place Luffy wanted to stay at for long, and he wouldn't. He even promised Nami that he wouldn't fight in this town. Luffy would be like Shanks and ignore everyone's taunts. After all, as far as he could tell, no one here was worth bothering. And as long as they didn't hurt his friends, then all would be well. Luffy pushed down the cold feeling he got as he entered the restaurant bar. He took the spot next to someone who was shrouded in several different colors Luffy had learned to despise. The first and most prominent was Black Death. Then, there was greed shown in a deep green, like the grass that had been dirted by the trash of Grey Terminal. The worst was the mix of flaxen and mustard yellow for betrayal and deceit. Despite his discomfort, Luffy took the spot because he didn't want his Nakama near this person. After all, even with his Haki's future sight, Luffy couldn't guarantee the safety of his Nakama without some precautions. Luffy frowned when the people at the bar started laughing at Nami, who simply asked for information on how to get to the Sky Island. Stop dreaming. Luffy heard with his Haki and thought, they're not worth it. They splashed some beer over his head, but Luffy remained indifferent. He simply stood up and wiped his pants lightly. Zoro, whatever happens, don't fight against them. The captain knew Zoro would understand what he meant. After all, the two of them had dreams that stretched across the blues. They had endured such laughter and mockery before. It wasn't worth getting angry over. It just meant these people didn't understand the importance of having a dream. Nami had a big dream too, but she had yet to understand why it was okay for people to laugh. Her pride would make her feel embarrassed at their mockery, but it was okay. She would learn to shout her dream proudly one day. A man's dream will never die. Luffy listened to the man whose aura he didn't like. He still didn't like this man, but his words were worth listening to. Let them laugh. Anyone who wants to be a first-rate man will encounter a time when there is no reason to fight back. Luffy frowned. If that was all this guy was going to say, he just wasted his time then. Instead of saying anything, Luffy merely stared straight ahead and waited for a path to open. It was about time they returned to going merry. Luffy listened as this man, Mont Blanc Cricket, revealed scarlet red anger and saffron yellow low self-worth. It reminded him of the Ace from the past, but Ace's was much more muted. If Luffy had observation Haki when he first met Ace, he was certain this would be what Ace's aura would be like. Whether or not my ancestor was an honest person or a great adventurer has nothing to do with me. Cricket lifted and pointed something to Usopp, who backed away in panic. Despite Cricket's painful emotions, Luffy wouldn't tolerate a threat to his nakama. He puffed in anger and readied his arm to punch the man. Just for being his descendant, one gets teased by strangers. Could you understand how a kid in that situation feels? My entire childhood was like that. Luffy frowned. This was actually incredibly similar to Ace's situation. Except Ace had been hated when he was searching for someone who would love him. I didn't care if it was true or false. I didn't want to find the gold or prove his innocence. This is a duel between me and the man who ruined my life. What about those two monkeys? They're just fans of the story, but they're dumbass who saved my life. Luffy grinned. He was waiting for Cricket to admit there were people who cared for him. It was good that he found someone who saw him as Cricket and not the descendant of Norland the liar. Just like how it was good that Ace found more people who liked Ace for Ace and didn't care for his biological father. Luffy clenched his teeth when he felt Cricket's Haki signature flickering. Small injuries wouldn't have done that to him. Someone intentionally beat up Cricket for what? Gold? To mock his goals? Luffy, Zoro suddenly spoke. His arm was pointing to Cricket's board. That's Bellamy's symbol. Nami exclaimed. Who? Luffy didn't recognize the name, but Zoro explained, it belongs to the guy from this afternoon. Want my help? I'll do it alone. He turned to Robin to ask, if I run along the beach, I can reach that city we were in, right? Yes, Robin replied. Luffy heard Nami or Cricket protesting, but he didn't listen to their words. After all, this guy touched his friend. It had nothing to do with laughing at him or his dream. He attacked my friend. Luffy pushed down his hat so that the rim touched his sunglasses. I'll be back before dawn. Luffy breathed softly as he stood still. This guy was talking endlessly as he merely jumped around everywhere. He didn't even need future sight to deal with this man. Hey, Luffy spoke indifferently, you asked if I know how to punch, right? Luffy sensed something approaching him which reminded him of the rabid dogs that once tried to attack him back on Grey Terminal. Except the dogs were fiercer than this guy. He readied his right arm and waited in a relaxed posture. Once the presence was close enough, Luffy sent his fist downwards and felt his hand making contact with a face. He turned to the clueless audience and demanded, where is Mr. Gold? Mary knew her captain was blind the moment he stepped onto her decks. He had stumbled as he touched her wooden boards. He whispered softly about hoping to feel a unique presence that would belong to her rather than being a simple ship. He still told her that he'd always recognize her. Mary was thankful to her captain. Thankful that he trusted her to be the vessel for the beginning of his journey. Thankful that he chose and welcomed her to be the home of his crew. There was also lovely Usopp, who repaired her with the utmost care. While Mary loved each and every one of her crew, she adored Usopp in particular, who came from the same land as her. She hoped Usopp wouldn't be too saddened in the future. Mary knew her time would be ending soon. She wasn't built for the Grand Line, but Mary would carry on until her crew could find another home for their travels. Mary hummed joyfully as she was docked at the edge of the island, receiving some changes to her form. She knew this was just temporary, but it was still interesting to experience this change. She needed to familiarize herself with this to help her crew get to the Sky Island. Mary trusted her crew's navigator. Her navigator could take them through storms after all. They would reach this sky island, so Mary adjusted her sails with the help of her crew. Mary wasn't built for the Grand Line, but she would take her crew wherever they wished to go, even if it destroyed her body. Mary hoped she'd be able to communicate with her captain soon. She knew he had the power to communicate with inanimate objects before they gained sentience. She just needed to be stronger. Unfortunately, her time was running short, and she needed to warn her captain and crew so that they could be somewhere safer. It was regretful to think that she wouldn't be able to reach the end with them, but it was a fulfilling life for Mary. It was certainly fascinating to be sailing on the clouds. Mary never thought she'd be able to experience this. After all, she was merely a caravel from a small island in East Blue. But here she was, up in the sky atop the White Sea after surviving a knock-up stream. Mary never thought her humble existence would be able to dock on an island in the White Sea. When her anchor hit the island cloud, she was able to feel the difference of this land. It was softer and vastly different than the reefs or sand she was familiar with, but the island cloud still firm enough to hold her in place. "Captain!" Mary screeched when she felt something grab a hold of her with all but 3 of her crew aboard. She wasn't sure if her captain heard, but she could feel herself starting to form. She could tell that she would soon need to use her own hammer and nails to fix her body. Knees trembled when the captain of these Blue Sea visitors seemed to look in her direction after she had called the Super Express Speedy Shrimp. It was as if he could see through her every action and fear, but he merely smiled at her as if he understood her plight. She was finally about to complete her task, her civic duty, when Luffy spoke up. "Hey Conies," the captain said, sunglasses blocking his eyes. It still eerily felt as if he could see straight through her soul. "Why have you been so scared since we've left your house?" Conies stilled. She hadn't expected him to ask so directly. "No, everyone here is filled with black fear." Luffy pursed his lips. "Oppression?" The long-nosed man, Usopp, nodded in agreement. "True. Everyone has been avoiding us, but you're helping us. You're even lending your boat to us. Wouldn't that make you a criminal too?" Conies hesitated. She heard her fellow villagers' worried whispers. They knew the consequences if she confessed. She knew the punishment as well. Fear continued to fill her, but guilt also continued to pierce through. She had been raised to be an honest person by her father, so tricking these kind visitors had been prickling her mind ever since she made the call. Conies kept her gaze down but resolved herself to admit the truth. "Don't you think," she shuddered, praying her father would not be implicated by her choice, "don't you think it's strange that I'm telling you how to get to the challenge and even lending a boat for you? It's as though I want to lead you to your doom." "Stop that!" She heard one of the friendly market uncles shout at her. "Are you insane?" Stop. Luffy's hand covered her mouth. "Don't say anything." Conies let tears fall as guilt continued to fill her. She needed, to tell them to run. "You'll be in danger if you keep speaking." Sanji, the kind blonde chef, removed his cigarette from his mouth and let out a long breath. She had no choice, right? Luffy didn't respond but glanced towards the sky as if he was expecting something. His expression turned grim, and he wrapped an arm around Conies' body, moving away from where they were previously standing. Conies didn't understand why he was doing that. Was he trying to kidnap her? That would be of no use? Did he want to take revenge for his friends? Then why didn't he let her speak? Crash! Conies gaped as the area she was previously standing on disappeared under the power of the almighty god Enel. Fear creeped under her skin as she recalled rumors of how God knew how his people thought. Her decision to confess to these Blue Sea visitors had already marked her as a traitor. Luffy puffed out a breath and set her back down on the ground. Phew. That was close. "Hey! Funny old guy. Take care of her." Conies wasn't sure who he was speaking to until someone appeared on a flying spotted horse. She recognized him. He was currently the Knight of the Sky, but she knew he was their former god. He was kind, and the people adored him. Everyone wished for his return, but no one dared to speak such things aloud. After all, they didn't wish to gain the ire of God Enel. After climbing onto the Pegasus' back and wrapping her arms around the knight, Conies sniffled, "Please come back, God." Luffy stepped on the skyboat and focused his Haki to find his Nakama. Worry festered in his heart as he recalled the desperate call of one of his Nakama. "Captain." It hadn't been a voice he recognized, but it also hadn't sounded like something he heard with his ears. The word had echoed in Luffy's head, and the feeling that accompanied the word was home. It wasn't the home he had in Fuchsia or Dawn Island's forest. It wasn't the home he felt with his brothers, grandfather, or his crewmates. Luffy wasn't sure who or what it was, but he knew it was something precious to him and his crew. Perhaps it was Mary, but Luffy wasn't sure how Mary would speak to him. Luffy huffed quietly. He could figure this out when he was with the rest of his Nakama again. "Sanji, Usopp. Get ready to paddle as fast as you can." "What?" Usopp blinked. He knew Luffy had some weird power that helped him sense his surroundings and sometimes even see into the future, but still, sometimes Luffy simply didn't make sense. Now! As soon as Luffy gave the word, Usopp saw the swinging axes approaching them. He pushed down the fear threatening to come up his throat and paddled furiously to get out of the range of the weapons. Soon, they arrived near the end, and Usopp saw the last axe swinging down far too fast for them to avoid. He screamed in horror, "Luffy, we need to break!" The sniper heard Sanji shout, "What the hell are you doing, Luffy?" Usopp gaped as he watched Luffy stand at the front of their little boat. The rubber man readied his arm and punched at their last obstacle. The axe fell from the vine it was swinging on and sliced at one of Skypiea's sea kings in half. "Let's go." Luffy sat back down at the front of the dial boat. Usopp glanced over to Luffy, hoping the captain would suggest a path to follow. His future sight thing would certainly be helpful. He pretended he didn't recall how Luffy said he could only see a few seconds into the future. He wasn't a fortune teller or something. Alas, Luffy didn't say anything and merely smiled when Usopp suggested going through the trial of Ball. It sounded the most harmless after all. The three pirates sailed to the rightmost entrance, and Usopp was certain this was the right path. Ah! Regret. Usopp screamed as he thought of that one word. They were going to fall 10,000 meters and die when they reached the ocean. The sniper heard Luffy's ecstatic laughter, and Usopp, not for the first and neither the last, cursed his past self for deciding to set sail with this crazy captain. What was he thinking? Setting sail with a blind captain. He should have turned back the moment he found out. Simultaneously, however, Usopp knew it was the best decision he ever made. Oomph! Usopp felt the ship land on something soft and nothing like the impact he expected. He cautiously opened his eyes and still saw sea clouds floating around them. There were also some white ball of cloud harmlessly floating around. He reached out to touch it only for Luffy to grab a hold of his hand. "Usopp, Sanji. Don't touch those. Some of them have monsters." Usopp paled in fright and backed away quickly. Once again, he was having mixed feelings about joining Luffy's crew. Sure, it was fun and Usopp could proceed on his path to be a brave warrior, but holy shit, why do these fluffy white ball have monsters inside of them? Usopp kind of wanted to cry. He didn't sign up for this crazy shit. He conveniently forgot about how he was the one who first jumped into the white cloud sea to explore only to drown in the clouds and nearly fall back to the blue ocean of death. Usopp watched as Luffy dealt with their opponent with relative ease. Not for the first time, the sniper was thankful for Luffy's magic power. "I can see without my eyes," bullshit. Usopp would love to have that power too. Maybe one day he can learn it. Soon, his captain held onto the enemy, and Sanji jumped to give the final shot. While he hadn't participated in the battle, Usopp proudly stuck his nose into the air to boast, "Ha! I knew this trial of Ball was the easiest." Sanji rolled his eyes. "Luffy did most of the work. I stayed on the boat." Sanji sighed and lit another cigarette. "Stop! Stop! Enough already. I'm responsible for this ship." Mary wanted to comfort her doctor who tried his best to desperately protect her. She panted in pain as her mast fell over, but it was okay. After all, she was here to protect her crew. It would be fine as long as Chopper and the rest of her crew were safe. She could take being burned and stabbed by their enemies. "Please, please," Mary begged. "Someone save our doctor." She felt weak and helpless as she was on land, unable to move. Even if she manifested into a visible Cloboterman, she wouldn't have been able to stop their opponent, but at the very least, she could have helped little Chopper hide. Her prayers were answered in the form of an elderly man upon a flying horse. Captain was here. Her friend from home and kitchen child were here too. From the other side, she felt the rest of her crew returning, and Mary could finally relax. She could bring them on one last journey. Her crew was reunited at last, and Mary laughed as she watched from a distance. Soon, she would tell Captain. She pulled out her hammer and nail, returning her physical form to the point she would be able to get her crew back to the blue seas. Her hull was damaged, and there was no way for her to fix that. Still, Mary would persevere on willpower alone if she had to. Mary felt Usopp from the distance watching in surprise and fear. She waved at him and giggled when he shouted, "Ghost." She felt Usopp pulling Captain to ask if there was someone trying to fix her right now. Mary did her best to focus her presence to her current apparition, Captain. Luffy tilted his head in wonder before grinning, "It's Mary." Mary smiled, "I can only carry everyone one more time, Captain. I hope you'll find a stronger ship on the next island. Thank you for the wonderful journey." "Mary?" Mary tried speaking again, but her voice had become dry. She sighed, knowing she wasn't old enough to maintain a longer conversation. She hummed quietly as she used the last of her energy to repair her physical form for her crew. Wiper gritted his teeth as he came across one of those blue sea citizens. It was the one who appeared to be a child, with his straw hat and sunglasses blocking the sun from shining into his eyes. He huffed out a smoke. "Didn't I tell you to leave this island?" "You did? Who are you?" Wiper furrowed his brow. Was this man mocking him? "Whatever, it's none of your business anyway. This island belongs to the people of Shandia." "Oh, is that so? Well then, sorry for disturbing." The boy bowed and then continued to walk past him. Frankly, Wiper frowned and shook his head. He wasn't sure why he wasted his breath to speak to the boy, but in the end, none of that mattered. If this boy, Straw Hat, was going to get in his way, then he was simply an obstacle for him to dispose of. "I'm not going to listen to your dumb excuses anymore. I will simply eliminate you." The boy merely grinned. "Well, that's easier to understand." Wiper gritted down on his cigarette as he watched the Blue Sea Dweller bounce away the cannonball for the 8th time. He exhaled lightly while grabbing a dial from his pack, opening a compartment in his bazooka. "I suppose it's time to change strategies." Wiper shot out the natural gas in the breath dial and prepared to release the burn bazooka. He gave a simple explanation to his opponent who had scrunched together his nose in confusion. It was about time for him to release the white flames. However, the moment he pressed the trigger, Wiper saw the boy dodge to the side while the flames burned a hole through the tree that was across from him. Mantra, the Shandian leader realized. He leaped over to where the boy was scrambling to take advantage of imbalance. Or was he pretending to have an opening? Wiper kicked from behind the boy, who easily dodged down and even grabbed a hold of his ankle. He was pulled to the ground, but Wiper immediately launched his bazooka toward the ground to avoid the crash. He gave one last punch behind the boy's head to confirm the usage of mantra, and then immediately put a distance between himself and Straw Hat. While catching his breath, Wiper prepared one more burn bazooka while his opponent launched his arms forward, striking directly at his chest. The Shandian coughed as the impact pushed him back against a tree. In the distance, he could see Straw Hat crouching with blood streaming down his body. It seemed they were an even match. Wiper called out, "What are you doing, Straw Hat? You're not dead yet, are you?" "Of course not." A shout returned, only to fade into an echo. Wiper furrowed his brows in confusion. Is he playing hide and seek now? He huffed and returned his attention back to his goal. While wasting his time with this Blue Sea citizen, Enel was getting farther and farther. He glanced down at his right hand, well aware that he only had one more chance to use reject. Enel yawned despite being well aware of an approaching attack. It didn't matter after all. He was lightning, and these pitiful humans would never succeed in defeating him even with their endless struggle. Perhaps he should end their misery sooner, but Enel was a benevolent god. And so, he gave this human the opportunity to attack. In the end, however, he was simply too weak. Enel sighed and pursed his lips when the man started to run away. He shifted into lightning and immediately arrived in front of the human. How tiring, he thought while lazily reaching his hand over to the pathetic human. 1,000,000 volts. Discharge. Enel closed his eyes and let his mantra sense the people on his land. 20 had fallen, likely because his powers had traveled through the river cloud. How weak, he disdained the humans whose voices had disappeared. Enel walked through the forest leisurely and only moved when he sensed someone close with his mantra. Truly, it was boring. Everything was going as expected, but really, how else was it supposed to go? He was God after all. Luffy titled his head while sitting cross-legged. So, he had fallen into a hole after his fight with the bazooka guy. He couldn't really sense anything with his observation Haki, which was odd. Very odd. There were vague, fuzzy shapes around him, but nothing Luffy recognized. His senses also showed that he was in a long tunnel. There seemed to be an end somewhere behind him, but it was hard to tell because of all the mixed signals around him. It was also a familiar feeling that Luffy faintly recalled from his younger years. Luffy furrowed his brows and crossed his arms as he aimlessly walked around this tunnel. He waded through what the soggy terrain littered with rubble. It was like Grey Terminal, he thought offhandedly. Soon his stomach growled and Luffy remembered that he left his backpack on the ground during his fight with the bazooka guy. He huffed while patting his stomach. Now I can't eat my pirate lunchbox. He pursed his lips in discontent. Hungry. Stomach. Food. Animal? Luffy paused and patted his right fist into his left palm. He finally remembered why this Haki feeling was so familiar. It was just like when he got eaten by the tigers and crocodiles back in the forest. But, it was still odd because he couldn't recall sensing a long tunnel when he was in a croc's stomach. Whatever. He just needed to get out to find his nakama again. So, how was he supposed to get out? Luffy grinned. The easiest way was obviously punching whatever ate him. He planted his feet on the steadiest platform he could find and pulled back his arm before launching it in the direction of where his Haki couldn't penetrate. Nothing moved for a few seconds, and then everything around him started trembling. Luffy tripped over his own feet and was soon thrown around along with the debris around him. Well, the captain thought, this was definitely some sort of animal. His thoughts were soon drowned out when Luffy found himself struggling to move as sea clouds started to surround him. Luffy gasped once he was free from the sea clouds again. Phew, I almost drowned. Stupid thing. He kicked the mysterious creature's side before deciding to continue walking in the direction that didn't abruptly stop his Haki. Luffy paused when he felt someone familiar approaching. He took a deep breath while grinning and finally shouted, Nami. Nami sighed in relief after being saved by the Knight of the Sky. The elderly man asked, why are you here? There was a huge Salala. Her eyes widened as she turned her head, snake. Nami frantically held on to anything within her reach while falling into the darkness. Nami! The navigator blinked and pointlessly looked around. That was Luffy's voice. She tightened her grip on the waver, knowing it would be a crucial item if she wanted to get out of the snake's belly. And clearly, she would need to get Luffy out too. And how the hell did he end up inside the snake? Oh, so this is a snake's stomach. I've never been in a snake's stomach before. Luffy laughed. Nami pulled her captain's cheeks and wailed, stupid. We need to get out. I don't want to be digested by a snake. She let go of Luffy to let his cheek snap back into place and furrowed her brows. Never been in a snake's stomach before? Did that mean Luffy has been in another animal's stomach before? She sighed, figuring that thinking about Luffy's life wasn't something she wanted to do. In any case, they needed to get out of here. She clicked her tongue and looked over to the waver she borrowed from Coney's and her father. I'll fly us out of here. Hang on to the waver. Nami really didn't want to be in the snake's stomach for a second longer, so she held onto the waver's handlebar and prepared to turn the throttle. Yeah, we're finally getting out. Luffy exclaimed while grabbing a hold of the waver behind her. Isa, the little girl who had gotten caught up in this ridiculous situation, started, wait, your hold dash. Nami twisted the throttle bar lightly, and suddenly, there was another hand on top of hers. More accurately, there was an arm wrapped around her hand, causing the waver to accelerate more than she intended. Luffy! The three of them barreled forward atop the waver while the Knight of the Sky flew forward on his bird, Pierre. Nami tried to balance the waver as much as possible while Luffy laughed behind her. She growled. Honestly, why did she agree to have Luffy as her captain? She gritted her teeth and squinted her eyes as they finally approached the snake's mouth. Soon, they were out and in the sky, but the waver no longer had a surface to travel on. She screamed, why haven't we landed? Familiar rubbery arms wrapped around her waist, and Nami shut her eyes as they fell. She felt a light bounce in their landing, nothing like the hard ground she was expecting. She slowly opened one eye once she was lightly placed on the ground and saw Luffy patting his belly behind her. Right, rubber. Isa gaped at Luffy, what was that? Gomu Gomu, Luffy grinned and breathed in air to expand his body, balloon. Nami pursed her lips and tightened her fist. She hit Luffy's head, causing him to deflate, idiot, we almost died because you made us go too fast. She paused and turned away, but thanks for saving us. She glanced around, seeing ruins of what seemed to be a temple. Now, where were they? Zoro jumped away again and grimaced. It was like these guys had eyes on the walls. Was it similar to Luffy's power? What was it? Haki? Whatever, he'll just train more after this. He hit an iron wall made from clouds and backed away. He wiped the blood dripping over his right eye, only to be hit by his opponent's weapon again. Zoro huffed as he put more distance between him and the guy with wings. He had been busy avoiding the attacks by constantly moving, but it wasn't really helping since his opponent could read his moves. Whew, he breathed out. There's no way you'll win if you keep your distance. That's not true, Zoro replied while turning his arms to his right. 36-pound Phoenix. The man's iron cloud whip bounced off his sword. Zoro leaped to his left as the wall behind him crumbled, but after seeing whip recoil from his attack, Zoro had an idea on how to finish this battle. As he ran through the ruins, Zoro could hear the other man talking endlessly. He rolled his eyes until he finally arrived at a dead end. Pray to God, swordsman of the blue sea. Zoro sneered, idiot. Why should I pray to God? He finally pulled Wado Ikamanji from its sheath and placed it between his teeth. Three-sword style, 108-pound Phoenix. The sword slashed against the Skypian priest's chest who soon fell to the ground. Zoro sighed heavily and used his left hand to remove Wado from his mouth. Finally, he thought and returned his attention to the snake. Now he had to get that witch out. And when they returned, he could get Luffy to train with him. After all, there was no way of knowing when there would another opponent who could predict his attacks and movements. 9. Enel pursed his lips after counting the final number of voices around him. 8. Annoying little snake, he sent a bolt of lightning to the king of the sky who had started making a fuss. Crying and singing. Truly, a worthless being. Enel turned to the other 7 remaining humans. 4 who had joined midway. Well, I think it's about to end this little game, he hummed. Game? The small one with the hat and glasses tilted his head. Enel created a cloud ball to sit on while looking down on the humans, including myself. There are 8 of us. When this game started, I predicted only 5 out of 81 of us would remain after 3 hours. With only 3 minutes left, 3 of you cannot remain. After all, God cannot make a false prophecy. Nay, Zoro. Who's this guy? He said he's God. Is he the one who made Coney sad? Probably. Enel gritted his teeth. These blue sea fodder weren't listening to him. He waved his hand forward in irritation. El Thor. He frowned when he felt the 2 voices move, and his mantra warned him of the one with the straw hat approaching him. He remained in place, well aware that physical attacks had no effect on his body. Ugh! For the first time in his life, Enel felt a blow against his stomach. He held his abdomen in confusion. What happened? He forced himself to stand up again and glared at the blue sea dweller. What are you? I'm Luffy. I'm a pirate, and a rubber man. Rubber? Enel hadn't heard of rubber before. Perhaps it was something the humans on the blue sea made. In that case, he closed his eyes, mantra. He avoided the punch, only to be hit by a swipe of the rubber man's leg. His body hit against the ruins of Verth, and he quickly realized his opponent also used mantra. No, I am God, Enel glared at the young pirate. He managed to catch the rubber man's arm, only to be hit by his leg again, crashing through the ground. How? Why? He struggled onto his feet and wiped the blood dripping from his mouth. The lightning Logia frowned and turned to face the other 6 people who were watching. He aimed for the woman who had told him about the golden bell. She was clever, but he didn't like her scheming ways. He sent a bolt of lightning in her direction, only. Don't touch Robin, you bstrd. The rubber man managed to catch up and punch him away from the other humans. Enel held his jaw in frustration. This was the first time he had to struggle so much since eating the fruit that gave him his powers. It didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. He was God. God. Robin's eyes widened as she saw Enel turn towards her. Her instinct screamed for her to run, but she knew she wouldn't be able to move fast enough. After all, this man was made of lightning. She held her breath but soon heard an angry shout. Don't touch Robin, you bstrd. Luffy, the little captain who saved her from the bottom of Alabasta. Luffy, who was now leaping in front of her, using his rubber fists to defeat this lightning god. Luffy, who once again kept her from reaching death. Robin vaguely recalled a voice from years ago, nearly 2 decades ago. Find family, Saul had said. Find your nakama. She wondered if this was what he meant but quickly shook her head. It was too early to judge. Soon, she would betray and leave them, just like all the other crews she was once on. Robin stepped back and noticed Zoro, the swordsman and first mate, step between her and the man who called himself God. Even as they watched Luffy pummel Enel into the ground, she couldn't help but notice the protective stance the swordsman took. Nakama, the voice echoed in her head again. The archaeologist continued to watch over Zoro's shoulders and saw blood seeping down from Enel's face. His nose was unnaturally crooked, and it was clear a bruise would soon form on various parts of his face. She took the time to observe a few details. After all, this was a rare chance to watch a Logia get beaten without the use of seastone. While this wasn't her usual topic of interest, it was still quite fascinating to see in person. And a smaller part of her enjoyed watching Enel suffer. After all, she was well aware she could have become a victim of this man's lightning. Soon, Enel wasn't standing up, just barely twitching on the ground. The Shandian, wiper if she remembered correctly, stood above the unconscious man. He placed his hand over Enel's chest and released some sort of impact on the lightning Logia. Seastone, she recognized. She wasn't sure where the seastone was, but there was clearly enough to keep the lightning Logia in a physical form. Interesting. Robin glanced around and found Luffy grinning at her. Robin. Truly, this boy's smile was blinding and bright. She couldn't help but smile gently back at her captain. You're safe. Yes, thank you, Captain San. Shishishi, of course. You're Nakama. Nakama. Her heart lightly stirred at the word. When was the last time she heard the words from somewhere aside from her memories? Everyone stared at the pile of rubble where Enel laid, motionless. Gon Fall in particular appeared to have mixed feelings, fully aware their land had been saved from a tyrant. Thank you, the elderly man bowed to Luffy. Thank you. Luffy merely shrugged, he was going to hurt my friends. Still, thank you. After a few seconds, Zoro finally pointed to Enel with his thumb, so what are we gonna do with him when he wakes up? Robin hummed, seastone binding would be best. She turned her gaze to Wiper, clearly indicating the Shandian possessed some form of seastone. As everyone else worked to get Enel under some decent binds, Robin kept her gaze on Luffy. Perhaps, she could tell him of the bell? She quickly pushed aside the thought, knowing that Luffy's Haki might be able to sense her emotions and thoughts. That was dangerous. Yosh, Luffy stood up while huffing, time to find that golden bell for the old man. Bell? Wiper suddenly turned. Robin nodded, yes, 400 years ago, a certain explorer claimed to have seen a golden city in the blue sea. He was ridiculed by society, but his descendants have continued to search the city of gold. What? A loud swallow could be heard among the people standing. What is the name of that descendant? Mont Blanc Cricket. And his ancestor? Norland. Robin couldn't help but watch as tears fell from the Shandian's eyes. The younger one, Isa, looked at Wiper, clearly confused. A breath, please allow me, as a Shandian who has inherited Kalgara's will, to ring that bell. Robin blinked. Of course. The descendants of Norland remained on land, and the descendants of Norland's friend had kept their promise in the sky. How fascinating. She smiled and tilted her head towards Luffy. You would need to ask my captain. Robin stood before the golden bell that Luffy and Wiper had pushed down from the top of the beanstalk. She was glad that she had revealed her speculation on the location of the bell. After nearly reaching the end of this trip to Skypiea, Robin had almost given up on finding the Shandian Ponglyph. Surprisingly, however, it was with the golden bell. Beside her, Luffy grinned, and Robin knew her captain could sense her excitement while approaching the Ponglyph. She approached the Shandians who stared at the golden bell and its text, "Hold the truth in your heart, keep your mouth silent. We are the ones who weave history with the reverberations of the great bell." The Shandian elder turned in surprise. You can read those letters?" She approached the Ponglyph etched below the golden bell and frowned as she read the ancient text. The ancient weapon that bears the name of the god, Poseidon. This reveals its location. Another weapon. This isn't the true history I am searching for. She sighed and started to walk away. She paused when she felt Luffy remain still. Robin, there's more, he said quietly. Robin tilted her head. She knew Luffy was blind, so what could he possibly know without seeing the Ponglyph stone? A Shandian villager soon answered her silent question. There's more written in this corner. Robin paused and gasped, I hereby guide this document to its end. Pirate Gold Roger. Luffy brightened, the Pirate King? He was here? Gonfall also perked up in interest. Roger? It's been more than 20 years since he came to this place. He was also a pirate of the Blue Sea. Is his name also carved there? Yes, while I do not know how he managed to get to this bell nor do I know how he knows this language, we definitely have concrete proof here. He wrote, I hereby guide this document to its end. Robin thought for a few moments before realizing the true meaning behind these words. The final Ponglyph. Chief of Shandia, I believe this piece of historical text has already served its purpose. Nay, Robin, is the final Ponglyph on Raftel? The archaeologist blinked before nodding, that's very likely. Then you have to stay with us until the end. Luffy laughed lightly. The Shandians stopped them to offer a pillar of gold as thanks for helping them reach their bell and telling them that they no longer needed to protect the bell's text. As they returned, Robin couldn't help but notice everyone aside from herself and Luffy were holding bags with gold slipping out. She laughed and couldn't help but think for the first time, they are pirates after all. Let's go. Luffy waved towards their crewmates. Nakama, a voice whispered. They were finally returning home to the blue seas, and Robin couldn't help but smile. As she stood near the center of Going Merry, she stared at Luffy and called out, Captain San. Robin. A smile as bright as always, Robin felt her lips twitch upwards. Thank you. I never thought that sailing and landing could be so adventurous. Shishishi, we'll have even more fun from now on. Oh ho ho, Foxy laughed as he held up his gun. He was aiming at the worthless horse leaping around in the plains. Bang! The bullet shot out, and Foxy grinned. However, some thing appeared and the bullet was shot right back at him. Noro beam. The bullet slowed in front of him, and he flicked it away. He glared at the perpetrator who shouted. Who the hell are you? Who am I? Foxy gasped. He actually does not recognize my face? Who cares about your face? Ugh, Foxy dramatically clenched his chest. Straw Hat Luffy. We, the Foxy Pirates, challenged the Straw Hat Pirates to an official Davy back fight. Foxy frowned. They won the first round, like usual, but the second round unexpectedly resulted in a loss. Well, it didn't matter. After all, the Foxy Pirates never lost in the combat round. With his Noro beam, the combat round was always an easy win. Straw Hat came out with his signature hat replaced by an afro wig. His sunglasses were still in place. He stepped onto his ship proudly and waited for Straw Hat to come aboard. The rubber man stretched his arm to step onto his beloved Fox figurehead. He glanced around casually and furrowed his brow. "You have a big ship." "Huh?" The opposing pirate didn't say more and simply stood in place, getting ready to start the fight. Foxy shrugged and also took his place. They both waited for the whistle to blow, and Foxy let Straw Hat launch the first attack. As expected, the younger pirate shot out his arm as a punch, and Foxy used his beam to slow the punch. He waited for Straw Hat to fall onto his back before feigning another Noro beam to the pirate on the ground. Unexpectedly, however, Straw Hat didn't fall for the trick, and Foxy's "just kidding" and beam landed into empty space. Eh? A fist approached his face, and for the first time in a while, Foxy felt himself flying backward from the impact of a punch. He landed against one of the walls on his fist, confused, but he released his smoke bomb to hide his body among his many decoys. Foxy was punched before he could even taunt his opponent. He couldn't help but wonder how Straw Hat knew where he was. All of his decoys looked exactly like him in the fog, so how did the opposing pirate captain find out? Foxy gritted his teeth and entered the trap doors in his ship. He hid behind the wall in the room of spikes. This would definitely be the trap that caught Straw Hat. He waited. And waited. And waited. And Foxy wondered where the teenage pirate went. He peeked out the door and didn't see anyone outside. Where'd he go? The hall leading to the trap room was empty. He heard a small creaking sound above him but simply passed it off as the ship tilting on the water. Crack! Foxy looked up and a familiar face was approaching his face again. In a panic, Foxy shot out his Noro beam, slowing his opponent, and ran towards the mirror room. How? How did he know where I was? Behind him, Foxy could hear walls breaking. And really? Was there a need to destroy his ship? Sure, Foxy had tossed some bombs around and exploded some rooms in several of his fights, but still. To shamelessly punch and destroy walls. The captain could only sigh and strengthen his determination to win this fight. Crick. Except. Crack. Foxy squinted at the mirror meant to reflect his powers. Cracks were starting to form, and the captain could feel an ominous premonition. Crash. And with a simple kick from the rubber pirate, Foxy's prized mirror room was destroyed. With the mirror shattered everywhere, Foxy could only run backwards. His powers would just bounce everywhere if he tried to use it with the mirror room in its current state. He went back onto the deck where Straw Hat followed. He heard his crew member announce their current state. Captain Foxy looks like he got a few punches, but it seems Straw Hat Luffy took a bigger beating. All the dust and debris sticking out of his afro really makes him look like he's been through hell and back. Are you crazy? Foxy cursed in his mind. The brat barely got hurt. He was just going around destroying their ship. As he lamented over the ignorance of his crew, Foxy tried to defend against Straw Hat's punch. However, as if the brat could see the future, Straw Hat moved away from Foxy's target the instant before his beam was shot out. Foxy felt the punch against his back a single second later. Unable to defend against this attack, Foxy's body proceeded to fly over the edge of his ship. It's over. Foxy was secretly relieved this fight was finally over. It had been a long time since he was last properly punched, and honestly, it hurt like hell. He didn't want to deal with this anymore. At this point, Foxy only hoped that the Straw Hats wouldn't take away something too important from him and his crew. Foxy gaped at the new flag that was bestowed upon the Foxy pirates. It was, ugh. The captain had no words and could only cry in sorrow with his crew. He knew there was a reason the Straw Hats laughed at him when he agreed to Straw Hat painting a new Jolly Roger for them. Kuzan, as an experienced admiral, could easily recognize the use of Haki in the young captain. Truly, Garp had done a fine job with the boy's observation Haki. Or at least, whoever had taught the boy. After all, Kuzan was well aware that the vice admiral specialized in armament. He managed to not only avoid getting his hand frozen the first time, but he also was able to stop him from freezing Nico Robin into a complete ice sculpture. Of course, the woman still had half her body frozen, which was still a cause of concern for her life. Kuzan let his eyes lazily trail after the Straw Hats who had taken Nico Robin away while he easily parried the swordsman's swing and the other man's kick. Their attacks were quickly stopped when their captain ordered. Stop! I'm gonna settle this myself, man to man. Go back to the ship? Kuzan peered at the boy. He really was as odd as he expected. After all, he was Garp's grandson. As the boy consistently predicted his movement and attacks, Kuzan started to wonder if using Haki himself would be overkill against a Paradise rookie. No, definitely not. This boy's observation Haki was strong. Possibly on par with his own. He squashed the whispers that brought up the possibility of the teenager's observation Haki being stronger than his. That couldn't be possible. After all, this boy was less than half his age. Kuzan sighed as he increased his speed and added a bit of armament onto his hand. A little punch to give some pain and then. The boy gritted through the pain and jumped away right before the admiral was going to release his ice. The captain wasn't fast enough, however, as the right side of his body was entirely frozen. You're not going to win, Kuzan sighed. Monkey D. Luffy merely grinned, it doesn't matter. Kuzan snorted and placed a hand on the ground. It was about time he finished this. Ice spread over the grass toward the rubber man, and Kuzan stared as the boy continued to smile. Thanks, Iceman. Truly, an odd man, Kuzan shook his head. He sat down for a moment to look at the newly made ice sculpture and sighed, ah, I was tricked. Mary sighed in relief after the Davy back fight. It wasn't pleasant, losing Little Chopper, even if it was only temporary. She felt proud of her captain who resolutely fought to ensure their nakama wouldn't be taken away. She was proud of all of them. Her entire crew used their best skills, and she was so proud of them. She wanted them to be safe and happy. Robin. Robin was frozen from her head to her hips and Mary felt as though she couldn't breathe. She didn't need to breathe to begin with, but every fiber in her body was tense and Mary didn't like this. She wondered if this was how it felt when humans couldn't breathe. Zoro. Sanji. The tightness Mary felt relaxed slightly. Br swordsman and chef were here. Still, she was worried as she saw each man with a limb frozen in the same way Robin was from her waist up. Seeing this, Mary knew there was only one place Luffy would be, and she wanted to scream. That was her captain, protecting his crew by remaining alone to face someone as he let their nakama protect themselves. Man to man. Mary heard her boys speak as precious Usopp screamed at her color-haired boys for leaving their captain in danger. Luffy. Captain. He was back, but he was frozen. Mary wished she was strong enough, old enough, to pull her captain into her embrace. Bring her captain on board and melt the ice that was killing him. She hated this with every fiber of her wooden planks and sails. She wanted her crew to be safe. Why? Why couldn't she do anything? Why was she so small? So weak? So useless? Mary watched her crew playfully run around her decks despite the near-death experiences from the day before. Despite the panic she had felt yesterday, Mary couldn't help but smile at their happiness. She agreed with her navigator who was rightfully frightened and worried, but in the end, Mary only wanted her crew to be happy. With that thought in mind, Mary began to frown to herself. She knew their smiles would turn into frowns soon. After all, her time would end soon. She wished she could take her crew to the very end, but in the end, she was not built for the violent seas she currently sailed upon. She needed to tell them soon. Before their next adventure. She needed her crew to prepare their hearts, while she prepared her own. Mary knew she could only tell Captain. She didn't need to be strong enough to tell Captain. She just needed his attention. After all, Captain had that power. She didn't know what the power was, but it allowed him to hear things he shouldn't hear. Captain. Captain. Mary called out. She'd been trying to get her captain's attention. She knew she needed to try harder to tell her captain that she could only safely take them to one last island. Captain needed to know to prepare everyone else on the crew. Usopp needed to know the most. Captain. Finally, her captain stopped his quest to find his midnight snack. Mary? Mary hummed, yes. I'm Mary. Luffy grinned, where? Everywhere. Mary responded excitedly. Captain was speaking to her. Well, he often spoke to her when he sat in his special seat, but he was speaking with her right now. Luffy tilted his head, clearly trying to use his special power to sense where she was, but he only appeared to be more confused. Still he smiled brightly, cool. Mary laughed. She loved her captain, always so willing to accept things as they are with no questions asked. She was nakama and that was all that mattered to Captain. I need to tell you something, Captain. Luffy. Huh? Luffy. Call me Luffy, her captain smiled while his hand dragged against her walls. You're nakama. Mary felt as though her heart had stuttered and a smile bloomed onto her apparition, visible to no one but she knew her captain could feel her joy with his power. Shishishishi. But then she paused with a heavy heart as she recalled the reason she called out to him in the first place. Captain. He didn't respond. Captain Luffy. She sighed sadly, my last journey is soon. Luffy stopped. Why? You need to tell them, Captain. What's going on, Mary? I'm sorry. Mary? I wish I could do more. Mary? I'll try speaking to you again soon, Captain. What? I'm not strong enough anymore. You need to tell everyone. Prepare them and yourself. I'll take you on one last journey. Mary.
Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification. so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.